myself in their shoes. It kind of makes sense of the 105 that when you're here for pretty much 3 months, they go 4-day weeks. They started that as an experiment several years ago. There's so many holidays in January and February that they were taking holidays off, and they said, well, God, those 3-day weekends are kind of nice. Maybe we should do that more often. And then they decided that if you have a real job, that sometimes if you could sneak a 3-day weekend out of it, could be 1 day in the office and kind of keep this thing alive for 3 months. And then they thought, that also means that if everybody's going back home, that they could do more Cracker Barrels. Instead of driving on a Friday and a Saturday, that now we could schedule them so they could do more Cracker Barrels. So they went to this 4-day week thing a while ago, and they've continued it. It'll never, ever go away. So the Constitution allows us to go 40 days. So they scheduled 37. So what they'll do is they will work 4-day weeks pretty much now until I think March 7th, and then I think they come back the 25th of March. So it's pretty much 2 months. So it's all January, February, and a little bit of March, and they will just immerse themselves. So you think about that for a second. They make 12 grand, which is a lot of money. It was very controversial when they raised all that. It used to be $12,000 for 2 years. So it used to be $6,000 a year. So nobody's making any money at it. And it means that you go to the grocery store, they grab you. It means you go to the ball game, they grab you. It means that you're accountable because you're back home all the time. So nobody's really doing it for the glory. Nobody's doing it for the cash. Nobody makes a living doing it. It's really good. So we don't have any real career politicians downstairs. They're not lifetime members. We've got term limits in South Dakota, which passed in the early 90s, which means you're limited to 8 years on the side. So they bounce back and forth a little bit when you get to the end of the 8 years. But I was looking, and only 6 of them have been here since like 2006. So, I mean, they turn over, we always turn over about a third of them all the time. So you think about that for a second, and you'll get it, is that lends itself to certain occupations. You have to be at a particular point in your life that you can take 3 months off to come out here and do this kind of stuff. So we get a handful of retirees, we get a handful of business people, we get a handful of school administrators, and then an awful lot of the organizations have started sending people up here. I don't know what it started with. I don't know who I would blame first. Maybe blame's not the right word. The hospitals probably did it faster than anybody else. So if Aaron Sanford makes sure that they cut somebody loose to come up here and serve in their back. I think the hospitals were first. Then the trial lawyers trudging along behind them, so the attorneys have got somebody up here. And then pretty much the chiropractors elected somebody up here. And then the optometrists, and then the dentist sent somebody up here. Because you guys saw them in caucus in the other room, having somebody in that profession goes a long ways in that little room sitting over there. Because what would happen is that, like anything else, and if you abuse it, they will absolutely throw you overboard. But it's like, you know what? This is a farm issue. Let's ask the farmer. Oh, this is an insurance issue. Don't we have an insurance agent in here? Oh, look, this is a legal question. Who's our attorney? So a lot of times they talk amongst each other with whomever's in a particular profession. And that just kind of makes sense with a part-time group. So they become their own subject matter experts, and they all kind of touch the stone, the person that sits around there, and you look around there. And absolutely, if you abuse it, they'll just stop asking because they don't care. If you're self-serving, they won't care. They'll just stop asking. That's just the way that it is. But it lends itself. So you're going to see a group that is probably older than most South Dakotans. Probably, I think we're up now, I think there were 30 ladies. So it's probably 3/4, 1/4, maybe female, male. They are, with term limits, we're getting a lot of newer faces. But if you were to take South Dakota and divide it into 105 subcategories, they're a pretty representative group. We've got firebrands, we've got old coots, we've got crazy people, we've got obnoxious people, we've got professionals. It's a really cool, fairly accurate cross-section of what South Dakota is. And every time you get frustrated, it's like, oh my God, I can't believe we're having this discussion. You can comfort yourself that there's probably 25,000, 30,000 people just like them somewhere in South Dakota because they're a fairly representative group. At the same time, they trend towards somebody that can take 3 months out of their lives and come out here and serve. So that kind of limits the field a little bit. But the reason I mention that is because it's important for you to know your audience, because that's kind of where they come from. So a lot of them, and in this compressed schedule that we operate in, and we're going to do 38 days, we'll go night and day for 3 months pretty much. It means that they don't have a lot of time. It means that they don't have a lot of time for wandering. They want to get to the point. They're going to be polite, but they want to be direct. They want stuff to be kind of impactful, because it's like, okay, I've got other things to do, because literally they're going to be dealing with 400 or 500 bills. So they might seem a little short, might seem a little brusque, and they're not. It just means that we've got a lot of stuff going on, so let's just kind of get to the point. And then also, because a lot of them are, retired, a lot of them are, okay, we've talked about this long enough, what are we going to do about it? So there's a lot of no-nonsense people downstairs. Okay, we talked about that long enough, what are we going to do about it? So, open it up. It used to be.
Already open.
Well, is it? It's funny, in this old building, is the handles there? Buildings and grounds, they left them. There was a time there, they got so upset, and it makes sense in an old building. You can't heat and cool an old building like this without it just being a monstrosity thing. So buildings and grounds took the handles off of all the windows. We're all looking, it's like, oh my God, it's 100 degrees in here, the handles are gone. Because I don't know if they didn't want us opening the windows or if they thought somebody would jump out. I don't know what the fear was, but some of the committees have demanded that they put the handles back in so they can open their own. Because imagine a group that's 3 times our size packed in here, because that happens depending on the issue. You just stand on your shoulder to shoulder and it just gets sweltered. And you're on 4th floor. It's an old building, so it's hard to heat and cool. So, and then we also had a time there that a bunch of the lobbyists downstairs had taken one of the handles from buildings and ground and had stashed it. So the ladies, we've got some of the menopausal age of my counterparts, had stashed the handles, were secretly walking around and opening windows and stuff, and then putting it back in their purse. So, yeah. You're going to have...
Steve, one time too, they didn't shut the window and the wind shifted, dropped about 30 degrees and froze the fire.
Which it does, because it's hard to heat and cool an old place. You're going to see a lot of people like me, not quite this handsome, but a lot of lobbyists. And I did a count. It's an absolutely unofficial count, but it'll make sense to you too. I don't know what you guys do in terms of yourselves or your families and your occupations, but I would challenge you that you're probably already represented by a lobbyist or 2 or 3, however. Because what happens is that it's kind of a zero-sum game up here. A lot of times, most of my time is just on defensive stuff, because I want to do something, but usually somebody else is a recipient of whatever I'm trying to do. So everybody that is anybody has got someone up here reading all the bills, seeing how they're affected. Everybody from the farm groups and both sides, Farm Bureau, Farm Union, to the retailers, to the teachers, to the administrators. The counties, not only has the county, the Association of Counties, but they've got county administrators and county elected officials, because one person's not enough for the counties. The municipal league's got 3, 4 people up here. You'd be hard pressed to find a group that isn't represented up here, because everybody's reading the bills. We're all doing the same thing. We're reading the stuff as it comes in. We're all trying to figure out whether or not it affects us. That's the lion's share of our job, is to read all the bills and decide if something affects us. And if it does, to make sure that it doesn't affect us in a negative way, or to make sure that it doesn't hurt us, to somebody else's benefit. So that's where a lot of time bar goes. This time of year, we're just reading as fast as we can read. And I counted, I didn't do it this year, I did it last year. There were like 300 lobbyists. So of the 105, literally that means there's 3 or 4 lobbyists for every legislator. Now, that's a little deceptive, because a lot of times, well, we're here, the homeschoolers were here today. They probably didn't have any registered people. But the cities are coming next week, and they'll probably register 4, 5, 6 people to come up and speak while they're here. The counties will do the same thing. Most of the agencies have got lobbyists, not because they're over here because they want to be, Because if I've got a question about what's going on in social services, then they're going to bring somebody from social services to ask questions. Well, they'll put a badge on them so they can speak. They do the same thing with the Attorney General's office. They do the same thing with information telecommunications. Almost all of the agencies have got somebody that'll come over here, because a lot of times the legislators have got questions for them. It's like, you know what, we know how this thing works. Or we're making a change to the statute. Does that affect you? So of those 300, probably half of them, not quite half of them, are blue badges, which is, you know, the difference is I've got, I don't know what color that is. I'll call that tan. Tan, whatever this is. The state employees have got blue badges, and they do that intentionally so that you can see whether or not they're coming. They're wearing a different colored badge. So you'll see a lot of badges on. What this means is that somebody, in this particular case, my employers, my contractors, Mary Kay said, I am the executive director of the investor-owned electric utilities. So that's Xcel, Black Hills Energy, MDU, Ottertail, Mid-American. So that's how I spend 80% of my time. I'm also the president of the broadcasters, so all the radio and TV stations are also clients. I've also lobbied for the firefighters since the early 90s, so I do a lot of stuff for the EMTs and for the fire service and the volunteers and the professionals, and I still got oil clients up in North Dakota that I do a lot of stuff for just because the Bakken extends down into northwest South Dakota. So I do a lot of stuff keeping out for those guys. But what this means is that essentially my chairman of the South Dakota Electric Utility Companies has to sign that I can speak on their behalf. It means that I can represent on their behalf. When paying the $25, they give me a badge. In your particular case, you can come up and speak on behalf of yourself. And you don't have to have a badge for that. So you come up and you can speak on behalf of yourself, and it's very common up here. Somebody will come up, and we had it yesterday. There was an issue yesterday. We had, I don't know how many people called in. There were probably 4 or 5 people that came up, and they were up there on behalf of themselves. So I'll talk to you a little bit about how that process works and what you need to do to make sure. But what you're doing is really valuable, and what you're doing, they carve out a means by which you can add that conversation. I've got a badge. If they're really fussy about it, they will make sure that you have the right badge on when you're talking in front of the committee. They can send you out of the room if I don't have the right badge on. It's like, no, you get out of here. I mean, they can really be persnickety if they want to. They won't do that with you, but they'll do that with us. So what the badges mean for the blue badges, it means they're a state employee. When you see those around, you'll see those walking around. And the white badges are the rest of us. So of that group, and it's kind of a made-up number because I was counting. So of the 300, there's probably about 70, give or take, that are up here all the time, in which I'm in that group. So most of the other ones come and go. So if somebody says to you that there's more lobbyists than legislators, you can tell them it's absolutely true, but that most of them are blue badges and most of them are just here part-time. So the full-time ones, the ones that appear all the time, there's probably about 70 of us. So, and they're the ones, it'd be worth looking at the list, because you'd be hard-pressed to find somebody that isn't representing something that you have an interest in, because they're all up here, because you really need to be. And so things just happen. Is when you're not here is when you have the problems, because either if you're not here, they figure nobody cares, or that you're okay. And so just being up here, and I'm going to give you a little bit of an approach on that too, because that works for you as well. Because the fact that they know you're vigilant is a big deal for you too. So what we'll do this afternoon is talk to you a little bit about how to approach them. And I'll talk about how to make yourself a little bit valuable in their eyes. And then we're going to talk, and I can give you absolutely foolproof ways that they will call you back or that they will talk to you. And then all of that is with the objective of striking a relationship. And the idea behind the relationship is that you're the first call they make. Because it's like, you know what, I've got something I think you'd be interested in, or I've got something I wonder if it affects you, or I've got something. Or to give you the reason to call them back and say, hey, I just saw one just dropped in. Have you seen this one? So we're going to spend this afternoon talking about tactically how to do that. And really, I can make that, it is so unintimidating and it is so easy that it's absolutely foolproof. It's absolutely foolproof. It's a silver bullet thing. So you'll be able to make introductions. You'll be able to meet some of these folks. And it's easy, and they'll be glad you did. And so that'll be a good thing for you and a really good thing for them. So as you're looking out that group, so what they're going to do is you guys are going to go hang out in the House and hang out in the Senate, and they'll introduce you. which means that Mary Kay's got one of the representatives are going to call you out. They'll have you do the, is it elbow, wrist, elbow, wrist? I forget my parade wave. Is it? Yeah. So they'll have you wave from the crowd. But Mary Kay asked me what I thought of that, and we talked about it. And okay, I will never lie to you, so you can ask me anything and I'll tell you exactly the truth. It's your first lobbying experience. We both thought it would be in your best interest, the legislators, to know that you're here. They need to know that you guys are watching these issues. They need to know that you're vigilant. They need to know that you care. And one way to do that is with a simple recognition of the fact that you all took the day and you come out and you hung out in the gallery. Your vigilance is a good thing, not only for you, but for them to know. So we talked about, so they're introducing you, but that's done absolutely for a purpose. That's not just a mistake, and that's not a happenstance thing. They need to know that somebody is watching issues that are related to this in this field and your families and your friends. They need to know that you're out there. So this afternoon is just a little glimmer of that. And that's almost easier because we don't have an ask for them. So it's not a heavy lift. It's just a, you know what? And that'll be part of our intro stuff. We'll talk about that a little bit later too, because by God, you'll be lobbying by the time we're out of here. So perfect.
The last one?
Perfect. Welcome. Your time is impeccable.
Yes.
So perfect timing.
I think we're outnumbered by the homeschoolers.
Perfect. There's a lot of homeschool. It tells you. I don't know what the numbers are in homeschool, but I think we're up to like 20%. Some crazy. I don't think, is it 20%? Yeah, I don't know how many students that is, but that's a mind-blowing amount of kids now at homeschool. Yeah, and it just continues to grow. Yeah, it just continues to get bigger and bigger and bigger. Yeah, so I think for your purposes, I just tell them that the fact that not only is it a testimony to you, but it's also pretty clever that you're having them introduced, because it's a good thing for the legislators to see that you guys are all watching. We're going to talk today, we're going to approach this really from the South Dakota specific deal, because that's the audience we're working with. So on the who side of the equation, I talked about who they are and the nature of who they are, and you kind of get a sense of that. There's a lot of rules that comes along with the place, and the rules are there because you saw I'm glad you saw a little bit of fire over on the outside. That gets more intense as session goes along, because you'll get that. If I'm going to run a bill and I've got something, now bills are going to come from a couple different places. The governor is going to come in with a package and she's going to run all the agency stuff. So that means that anytime a nickel and dime bill comes up in the agency, and they want to fix it, a lot of times it's just really little stuff that we try to accommodate these people and we can't. Or we discover that we have a conflict with these two things. So a lot of times it's little stuff that's niggly stuff. So the agencies put in a request to the gov's office signs off, or they don't. And so those turn into a bill. So half of the bills come from the agency and from the governor's office. And a lot of those are fairly routine and fairly mundane. A lot of times they're not controversial. They're not very challenging. A lot of times they're just things that need to get done. They're kind of clerical in nature. That's a big chunk of the bills that they manage. The other half comes from the legislators or from you all. That's where the how idea becomes law. That's where it comes from, because, and I've been part of those where crazy conversations in the middle of nowhere turns into statutes, because that's just kind of how it starts. The reason we have the rules is because if Bob is a legislator and we're sitting in this room and we decide that we've got a wrong that needs to be fixed, or we decide that we have an issue in common, or we decide that, by God, there's relief available, and we come up with an idea, and we approach Bob, who's our legislator, about carrying that for us, he'll agree to do that, partly just to satisfy us. He might not care at that point. He might do it just to be a good guy, because he is. But what happens is that as time goes on, now, the process is the same, but we're going to talk about that when we get into the what. But what will happen is that as time goes on, Bob's going to get an interest in that legislation. He's going to meet all of you. He's going to hear all of the proponent commentary. He's also now going to he's going to start to hear the opponent stuff, because we're going to take that idea and we're going to put it into bill form, and now all of a sudden everybody's looking at it. So it's like, well, wait a minute, they can't be doing that, or they can't be doing that, or they consider this. And so he's going to start to attract flies as this process goes along, and he's going to not only hear from us, but he's going to hear from all the opponents. And then the what part of it, and we'll talk about it more, but essentially you go committee, which is where we're at, committee floor, and then you repeat the process. So committee floor. It's really brain simple. And then it goes to the Gov's office. So committee floor, Gov's office. Well, the reason they have rules and the reason that they try to abide by the rules is that as time goes on, the issues all get more emotional. They all get a lot hotter. Everything gets a little bit more intense. And people get vested in it. Bob's going to discover after meeting you all that not only is it a good idea that I thought was kind of a lark, and I thought they were kind of out to lunch and a little bit crazy, but you know what? It makes a lot of sense. So Bob now is going to start to defend us with other legislators. Bob's going to start to tell the story in caucus about the bill. Bob's going to stand up in committee. And he's going to speak on behalf of the measure. He's going to introduce all of us who become his friends. And he's going to start to take a stake in it. Well, as emotions get higher and the stakes get bigger, you have to kind of manage that discussion, is why they've got the rules, because those little flare-ups get more and more common as session goes along, because it's just people, they start to get an interest, they have a stake. We were talking about it at lunch. I've never seen a fight in here. But I've had legislators call themselves off of the floor. We've almost had a fight in the back of the House. I personally kept one of our lobbyists from throwing one of the other ones over the balcony on third floor, which that guy was enough of an asshole that there would have been any witnesses. So, because people get emotional about their things and they care and they get vested. And that's the only way you're really going to get it done, is if you have an interest and if you got a stake and if you're compassionate. So what happens is you get competing passion, competing interest, and it just gets hotter and hotter as time goes on. So what happens to them is that they have to manage that discussion somehow. So that's why it looks sometimes like it's formal. Sometimes it looks like you don't need all of that ceremony and all that stuff. But the reason they do that is because it's the only way to really manage the place so that it doesn't blow up. The other part about that goes to the who, is that one of the best things about them is also one of the worst things about them. Because you have to try not to take things personally, which is really hard. Because if it's something you care about, or something that you're an advocate for, or something that you're good at, or something that you have a personal stake in, it's hard not to take it personally. And frankly, they won't care if you don't take it personally, because if it doesn't matter to you, it's not going to matter to them. At the same time, there's a zillion competing interest for whatever you're working on. There's way more requests for cash than there's money available. There's way more interest groups than time for them to give to them. There's always more of a demand than they have the ability to satisfy. Always. So what happens is that they come in with an issue that's their number one. They come in with an issue that they're all jacked up about, and they're all, can you buy that? So they come in with something and they are fired up. Well, they might just shove it right up your nose. It's like, yeah, nope, and then you're done. Well, you have to be able to set that aside, because you might be working on something else 5 minutes later with the same person that come up and stuck a knife in your deal. So it's hard for them to maintain the passion without absolutely sending themselves over the edge, because this place will just grind you up if you let it. But it's also the same reason that they can be in a violent discussion and a fairly vigorous argument in a totally opposite sides of one issue, but then 10 minutes later be joined hands because they're working together on something else. Because with those 500 bills, there's going to be such an assortment of stuff that comes in. You might discover that my best friend is my worst enemy on this particular subject. And it's just the nature of the deal. So they safeguard that a little bit because it can really, if everything got to you, I mean, it can really, really get to you. It can be really hard. Some of the stories are really hard and some of the things you really want to solve. And if you had an unlimited checkbook and you could just write checks and you could take care of people, but you can't legislate common sense. You can't legislate smart behavior. You can't legislate fools. You can't legislate stuff. So sometimes you just have to accept the chaos and do what you can in the middle of it. And so that's what they usually try to do. And then the other part about the who that I always liked, and there's two different people that I know that did it well. One was Don Rounds, who was a lobbyist for a long, long time, and is Senator Mike Rounds' dad. And Don used to tell the story, similar to a guy named Larry Gabriel, who Larry was a farmer out of Castlewood, rancher, and he was a majority leader before term limits, so he was around for a long time committee chair. But what he would tell you as far as the who goes is that for Wyatt's sake, who's a legislator tomorrow, you just tell him you're a no unless you convince me otherwise. Or I'm a no until you tell me why I should be a yes. And Larry would say, never be afraid of a no vote. And the reason for that isn't because Wyatt doesn't care about what you care about, not because your issue doesn't resonate with him, but Wyatt just says, look, the law is the way that it is for a reason. The circumstances are the way they are for a reason. We've had 99 sessions. This thing has been hacked at 50 different ways, and here's where we've landed. So I'm okay with the system as it exists today, unless you convince me otherwise. No doesn't mean I'm backward. No doesn't mean I am obstinate. No doesn't mean I don't get it. No doesn't mean I'm hard-headed. No doesn't mean I'm a Neanderthal. No just means that by and large, I accept where we are today because we're not here by accident. It happened for a reason. So I'm a no unless you convince me otherwise. And there's a lot of them that come from that. Probably more of them come from that than any place else. That's why it's easier to kill stuff than it is to pass stuff. So if you're trying to make change and you're trying to get things passed, there's going to be a bias against that. And not because they don't care. Just because they respect the reason that we're here. I'm going to figure that smart people argued before I arrived. I don't know anything about the subject. I'm going to accept where we are, and I'm okay with that. But I will listen if you want to tell me why it should be different. And if you're good at it, and you're compelling, and it makes sense, and you're right, then they're going to go, you know what, you're right, let's do that. And it's the reason that we get 500 bills introduced. I bet we probably signed a couple hundred of them. It means an awful lot of this stuff dies when it arrives. And not because it's a bad idea, and not because they're pushing back, or because they're hard-headed or obstinate. It just means that, you know what? I bet we've had 20 hearings on this subject over the course of the last 50 years. Proponents and opponents have argued this thing for 20 years, and here's where they've landed. So I'm going to respect that process. I'm going to respect the people that got us here. I'm going to respect the experts. So, yeah, thank you for visiting, but I'm a no, and I'm going to stay a no. So that's the other thing. It's one of the lobbyists. There's 100 ways to say no up here that are, or 100 ways to say yes that are actually no's. But they bias to the no. And that's just where they come from. And so you have to not be offended by that. It doesn't mean they don't get it. It doesn't mean they're not listening. It just means you have to figure out a reason that in their universe is compelling enough to flip them over to the yes side. And so it all kind of goes to the who part. For the guys that came in, I was telling, we'll do as a who, what, why. And the who is really these legislators. And then the what's going to be how a bill becomes law, and then we'll do why y'all need to be engaged. So for the who part, they're going to come in skeptical. They're going to come in as no's. But don't let that intimidate you, and don't let that bother you. Because a lot of times, that's the old line. Never be afraid of a no vote, and I'm a no until you tell me yes. So that's just where they come from. Because it's easier, and by and large, we're in a handful of states. They talk about us being a red state. I did that look too. There's 33 states that the Republicans have both the House and the Senate. There's 11 of them that are blended, and the other 20 some odd are, I think there's 17 that are blue, both House and Senate. So when they say that we're a red state and we're a Republican state, that doesn't really make us an outlier. It doesn't make us crazier than anybody else. It's just a label. This group are professionals and they're part-time that want to get stuff done and go home. Most of them, if you took a poll, and it would be an unofficial poll, and said, what's your most important thing to do here? They would say, look, we're here to manage the checkbook. Because the Constitution requires a balanced budget in South Dakota. They realize that as goes your checkbook, goes your lives. As goes the checkbook, that's where my priorities are. That's where my things go. Checkbook is through that prism. I see everything. 3/4 of this group, 2/3 of this group would say, look, let's just do the checkbook and get out of here. Because that's just where they come from. So you have to know where they're coming from when you walk in, because that's where they're going to be coming from. That's just the way they are. And in their defense, we're one of, I don't remember the number, we're one of like 3-4 states in the country with a pension fund that's fully funded. We balance the budget every year. We don't have any gimmicks to it. Our sales tax and property tax, and it's expensive to live, and it's expensive anywhere. But in South Dakota, it's cheaper than a lot of places. And so by and large, it's worked for them so far. So they're not going to turn that apple cart upside down. Everybody would do more if they could do it. If you could solve all of your friends and family's problems with a wish, you would. But the reality of it is that they've got to figure out a way to pay for it. And they're just going to go no in most things. So knowing that helps you. So of this group, so remember, so they're professionals, they're part-timers. The other thing is that I mentioned earlier that they're working virtually with no staff, right? They're working off this little miniature desk as their whole thing. Well, that means they need you. That means they need lobbyists. That means they need subject matter experts. So, because you're a resource to them, because they don't have resources themselves to figure it out. So that means the ones, and they figure it out right away, the good ones figure it out right away, because they don't have to make a commitment to me. I'm there on behalf of my clients. So they're going to probably know my biases. Now, I'm a lobbyist. Most of the lobbyist time, a lot of our lobbyist time is spent managing our clients. Because, I mean, my clients, the investor-owned electrics, are all billion-dollar companies, which you should have clients that are billion-dollar companies. That's just a good thing. But at the same time, they're used to people, when they bark orders, they're used to people just do that. You know, my board is the CEOs and the VPs. They're used to people just saying, yes, sir, and how do we get that done? Well, you don't walk down here and say, you will do this. They say, yeah, well, no, we're not. So get out of here. It just doesn't work that way. So an awful lot of the lobbyist time is managing your clients and the expectations of what they want to do. So in order to do that, you have to kind of know what you're working for, and you kind of want to know what your ask is. So you hear the elevator pitch, or you hear that kind of line, you have to be able to figure out what you need and be able to explain it fairly simply and fairly quickly, which is kind of a fun thing. So you reduce the ask kind of to its essence. You kind of get right to the heart of the deal. That's what they like. That's what they respect. That's what works for them. So half of the time, our challenge as lobbyists is figuring out what we want, or what our message is, and then how would you communicate that with them? Because they're just trying to fix it and move on. Steve, I would love to talk to you, but there's 7 people lined up behind you that want to talk to me about other stuff, and we've got committee going tomorrow morning, so what do you need? Well, here it is. Oh, I get that. So you have to be able to develop your thing and say it succinctly and say it in a manner that's fairly compelling, and that doesn't mean you're selling anything, because if you're selling, they'll realize it. But if you're sincere and you're authentic, and it's a real thing, and you have an ask, they're going to take an interest, and they're going to be intrigued, and they're going to need you. So the whose side of the equation. So I told you I'd make it real simple for you. Okay, so I was looking to ask Marianne, she gave me, or Mary Kay gave me your legislators in the districts that you live in. So a very, very easy way to get yourselves involved in this process is you reach out to them. Now, you can do it a lot of different ways. You can go to a Cracker Barrel. You can participate with Bob's group. You can participate in your association. So that's another way. You also can reach out by email, by phone, by text, whatever's comfortable with you. A lot of times at a Cracker Barrel, and you can say, you can do it verbatim. You can say, hey, we were just in Pier. I was out there with another group of like-minded folks trying to figure out how we can advocate for ourselves and our kids and our family because we've got a lot of challenges. We've got somebody up there that watches this stuff all the time, and so do I. Would you be okay if I reached out with you on something if it comes up that matters to me? And I can guarantee you they will say yes. And that's not a heavy lift. That's not an obnoxious ask. That doesn't mean you're being pushy. Because you're just saying that, look, we watch all this stuff. So if we see something that shows up on my radar that I care about, are you okay if I circle back to you? And they're going to say yes. I guarantee they will say yes. And you would too. If you're a legislator tomorrow, don't you want somebody watching stuff that's going to reach out to you if it affects? So congratulations. You see a bill that comes up that shows up on your guys' register that you're watching, that you have an interest in. You can say, hey, do you remember I sent you an email a couple weeks ago and said that if I saw something, and you said, yeah, well, now's the time. I saw something, and here's what it is, and here's what it does. And you can start a dialogue with them. And guaranteed, they will be supportive and acceptive. Now, remember that they're going to get 100 other emails or 200 other emails, so you're going to be fighting with everybody else, and there's a lot of noise and there's a lot of chatter. So put yourself in that shoes. Okay, that's the third time I said that. I have to watch myself. I got to go beyond 10. So put yourself in that position. You're sorting out 500 emails that are coming to you going, oh my God, will this never end? Aren't you going to be responsive to the ones that you know? Or the ones that aren't really histrionic or over the top or really flaming or really lunatic-y? Aren't you going to reach out to the ones that seem like a reasonable, balanced, thoughtful approach from one friend to another that's trying to teach them a little bit about something that they care about as part? That's absolutely who they're going to respond to. So you can separate yourself from a lot of that noise and with that clutter so easily. And then what happens as time goes on, you strike up and you discover a relationship and you get to know more about them all the time. And then you'll discover that, oh my God, they've got, either they've got someone in a similar spot or one of their best friends is. And you'll discover, like everybody's got a story, you've probably got more friends on that floor than you even really had thought about or even really contemplated because you've got a lot of folks in a similar position. And they just don't. They don't advertise, so you wouldn't know unless you're talking to them. So you absolutely can have an impact on them, and they absolutely want to hear from you. So the fact that, and that's when I said that it helps you that you're not quite as smooth, that's one of those cases. Because if I do that, they're going to expect me. I don't know how many bills I'm writing because they expect me to be able to figure it out or expect me to be able to make a phone call and get to the bottom of the deal. So it falls to me. That won't happen in your case. They're going to be excited that you reached out. They're going to be receptive to the message, and they're going to listen to you. If you absolutely put it all in caps and you're screaming the whole time, then it won't happen very often. But they are going to want to hear from you, and they absolutely will want to hear from you, and they do. So let's assume that's the case. So here's the how part. So remember I said committee floor, go. So what happens with those bills? We'll have to talk about if you guys have got anything in particular that you're watching or advocating or any bills on your stuff. I know you got some things you're doing tomorrow. Is there anything going on?
There isn't a lot this year.
That's good.
Right.
Yeah, that's a good thing.
There really wasn't even tracking.
That's not only is that a good thing, but that almost makes it even easier because it means then for their purposes, it means there's no pressure to establishing the relationship with you. And so what would happen then is if one of these bills came in and it's one that you really cared about, you're all over it, then what happens is that the process is always the same. They'll turn the bill to paper. That's where the idea becomes a law thing. It goes to paper. And then the process goes committee floor, gov. So what that means is, and we'll do this here in about 45 minutes, is that you probably wouldn't be in this position, but you can be. And that's where they'll take care of you. But this is you to them. They're going to be sitting up here and they're going to be they're going to do their rules because they're going to want to manage the conversation. And so they're going to hear from the proponents. So that means everybody that likes the idea is going to stand up and speak on its behalf. And sometimes it's really good. And sometimes like, oh my God, will this never end? And sometimes it's just guys that want to go up there and say, me too. And then sit down. It's like, oh, this is just awful. So sometimes that is not, so that's all the proponents, but that's the way. Always the same, proponents first. And then they'll do opponents. So then it's like, oh my God, I didn't know it affected those guys. It's like, really? Oh, that's a disaster. So you hear all the antis. So you're going to get all the pros, and then you're getting all the cons. And then they'll have the committee, if you got any questions for us. Well, then the committee can ask questions. And they'll bring people back up here, the proponents and the opponents, and they'll ask questions. Well, think about it for a second. If you do that enough times, and that's what happens to these legislators, you get to be pretty knowledgeable on any given subject. You're going to know, I said it in the other side, on the other room, where you stand depends on where you sit. The example I used was a teacher. You're going to know your profession. You're going to know your spouse's, your family's profession. You're going to know a lot about what goes on in their world. But there's such a range of issues, they don't expect you to know them all. You're not going to know them all. Well, these folks are in the same spot. I mean, really good legislators just don't know much about some of these subjects because it's just nothing that ever crosses over into their world. Why would it? It just doesn't. But the nature of the place is that with 500 bills, there's going to be a lot of random stuff that they're going to hear about. So now think about it for a second. So they're sitting up here listening to this random commentary on the stuff on which they have no interest and didn't even know they wanted to know. But now you're going to hear all the proponents. And then you're going to hear all the opponents. And then you're going to hear all the questions. So think about how much they learn about some of these subjects, because you can't do that over and over and over and over without becoming a little bit of a subject matter expert yourself. Can't help but, because you hear the pros and the cons. So you might have an opinion that completely changes. You also are going to develop an opinion if you didn't have one, because you're going to get to hear both sides of an issue on every subject that shows up in front of the committee, which is just a hoot. It's probably the people are my favorite thing, but the fact that you learn stuff that you never even thought you wanted to know or wouldn't even have cared about, and you're learning it in spades, is absolutely my favorite thing. And they're in the same spot. They're going through all of that stuff. We're running from committee to committee trying to cover all the stuff on our agendas, and they're sitting there listening to proponents and opponents in every subject. It's also one of the reasons that I'm not a fan of term limits, because one of the term limits things with the 8 years is in the old days, they would pick committee chairs and stuff kind of by their merits. They've been around for a long time. And so, you know what? You seem like the smartest one of us all, so you ought to be chair. Well, if you've been the chairman for 10, 15, 20 years, and you've heard all the pros and cons on a particular subject for 20 years, imagine how knowledgeable you become in that particular subject. Harold Halverson knew more about insurance than anybody in the building could teach him because he was the chairman of commerce for all those years. Larry Gabriel, chairman of ag, all those years. Gordon Peterson, chairman of transportation, all those years. And so they used to be able to manage themselves a little bit better because the chairman would say, yeah, thank you very much. We're not going to be doing that. And here's why. Because we've heard it 20 different times over the last 30 years, and it dies 20 different times, and here's what they tell you, and here's why it dies, and here's why we're not going to do it. Well, you don't have that much anymore because they all kind of circle around. So it's hard for them to manage themselves like it used to be, because most of the time they haven't been around here long enough to remember all those old fights. I was in appropriations last year in Bowling. I was just sitting in the audience. I was up to watch a bill. It wasn't even my thing. And Bowling said, well, I see Willard sitting in the back of the room. I've got a question for him. It wasn't even my thing. I didn't even care. But Bowling saw me sit in the back, and he brought me up. He says, do you ever remember anything like this happening before? We would only ask that of an old person. But the answer to that was no, because I knew it had never happened before like that. Because it was, like I said, 34 years, I knew. But you don't have that kind of institutional memory up here that you used to have. So it makes it harder. At the same time, you got people served that wouldn't have before. You have people in here that might not have been here before. So that's a good thing. Fresh ideas, fresh blood, new perspective. That's a really positive thing. At the same time, you don't have a lot of the institutional memory that you used to have. You don't remember why things are the way they are. You don't remember what it was, a big fight it was to land on this particular language the way that it is. So, committee floor, gov's office. What that means is, imagine that stepping up in not only intensity, but sophistication of the discussion. Because as this thing goes on, by the time an issue gets talked about for a long period of time, there's really no surprises anymore. Because everybody that likes it is going to come up and tell you why, and everybody that hates it is going to come up and tell you why. So there's not a lot of new stuff that shows up in there, and particularly not when it goes over to the second side. It just means the arguments get more sophisticated. The arguments get a little bit deeper. If they had questions, by now you've answered them. If they wonder why stuff is the way that it is, by the time you get further down this process, they'll be able to tell you because somebody's done the history work. Somebody who's gone back and looked at the statute and says, well, here's why the language says what it is. Because as the more light you shine on that stuff, the harder the scrutiny, the longer it gets, the more lights that shine on it, the less stuff. So nothing ever really sneaks out of here. They don't ever do anything by mistake. I mean, absolutely, we've had some blunders. They absolutely do blow stuff once in a while. And sometimes politics intervene. But by and large, the system sorts that stuff out. Because if it's a really crappy idea, it won't survive that kind of scrutiny. People will go along for a little while because it sounds good. But you know what? It doesn't sound good the more you look at it. Or it doesn't work the more you look at it. Or it's just not realistic the more you look at it. So usually the nonsense stuff, we get a lot of goofy stuff introduced, but it all dies. So goofy stuff doesn't get out of here very often because it just doesn't stand up to the scrutiny. And by and large, it means they land in the right place. Sometimes it's kind of a meandering path. Sometimes it's not the way you want it. Sometimes it's not the outcome you're looking for. But it means that they usually land in the right place. And that's kind of comforting because they don't really blow a lot of stuff. And for somebody that has seen a lot and done a lot, by and large, they don't blow very many things. So committee floor, gov's office. So what that means is that process is the same. So for your purposes, so there's two things to that. First one, if you had an issue, then we'd spend our time getting ready. We'd be working that issue for you. But that also means in the absence of one, it almost makes your contact even easier because all it means is that, look, we don't have anything this year, but I wanted to reach out to let you know that we read all this stuff. And we've got somebody in here that's reading all this stuff too. Maybe you've seen them. Mary Kay, who would be your lobbyist on the ground up here? Have you guys got anybody around that's your go-to for these legislators? Really, you don't really have a registered lobbyist, do you?
You get federal funds, so you have to be careful about that.
Yeah, sure. So that almost, for your particular case, that almost makes it better because it means you're the lobbyist or you're the resource or you're the go-to. What your pitch is then is that, look, we follow all the issues. And Bob Shop and Mary Kay, they keep us tuned to this stuff, so we watch all those things. And I've got some questions. We don't have any issues. We don't have any issues this year that we've been able to identify. But when we do, are you okay if I reach out to you? And they're going to say, by God, would you please? And you can say, yeah, and you would, and you can. So it almost makes it easier that you don't have a specific ask. If you had an ask, then we would spend our time talking about what the pitch is for that. Because the thing about lobbyists, as I said, a lot of our time is managing our clients and kind of playing defense, is that for all these lobbyists up here, if I was given an order by my companies to go do stuff, it's only going to be as good as I do it. Well, if I don't believe in it and I'm not passionate about it and I think they're out to lunch, that's going to show up in my commentary because I can't lie to myself and I definitely can't lie to these guys. And if they say you will do this, I've fired clients before because I'm going, yeah, we're not doing that Because the other thing about the who is that they're coming back next year. If this room is struck by lightning in the next 5 minutes and all of us are gone, they'll convene next year. If the Senate blew up tomorrow, they'll reappoint replacements and they'll come back next year. So you have to kind of play the long game with these guys because they're going to be around for a long time. Well, so for your purposes, you want to establish a relationship. You want to get to be the go-to for them. You want to be the resource for them. And then as far as the issues go, then here's how you advocate. So you're going to be, you would come up here, you'd introduce yourself, same thing. They're going to, like I said, they're going to make you sign in the back. Usually there's a podium that sits back up here with a sign-up sheet on it. It's over here. So what they'll do is there's a sign-up sheet in the back, and they'll have you sign up on that sheet. And they'll do that so that they can call you by name and so they can kind of manage up. And then they'll look and see on the sign-up sheet, if there's 50 of us on it, they'll go, oh my God, there's 50 people who want to speak to this thing. And so they're going to have to do that to kind of manage you. But they'll have you sign up on the sheet, and then they'll put you in the record. And then you would come up and you would sit down and you would introduce yourself. That'd be the first thing you do. And then a lot of times you want to tell them why you're there. So they're going to ask if you're a proponent or opponent. And that's pretty easy because you're going to be on one side or the other. And then, yeah, perfect. Yeah, that's awesome. So Mary Kay's got a cheat sheet too. So this is, you'll be doing a little bit of this tomorrow. So the other thing, and it's a courtesy, and it kind of makes sense. I'll let you guys all do the same thing. Maybe you have this out. There's your, oh, that's very easy. That's awesome. There's your cheat sheet. They do it to manage the conversation, but you want to be deferential to the chair. So everything goes through the chair first, and they'll do that so they can manage the discussion. So even the committee members kind of work through the chair. So you'll introduce yourself. You're going to be humble. You're going to be sincere. You're going to kind of want to succinct. You're going to know what you're going to want to say. And then you're going to do everything through the chair. So your cheat sheet is you do your commentary through the chair. When you get done, they'll send you down. If they bring you back up for questions, somebody asks you, yeah, I've got a question over here. Well, then you ask the chairman if it's okay to answer the question. You just do everything through the chair. And that's just so that they can manage the conversation is all that is. It also means that if somebody's gets all hot, because it happens once in a while, then you got to do that through the chairperson so they can kind of manage the discussion, whether that's with the chair or whether it's one of the committee members. So everything goes through the chair. And then you just answer questions. Why I'd ask a question? If you don't know anything about the bill, what do? Well, if they ask you a question that you don't know the answer to, you just say, look, I don't know. Because they will respect the fact that you're honest more so than you're up there making up an answer. Because they'll appreciate the fact that you have enough courage and honesty that you would say, I don't know. Because they'll like that. And if you don't, you can say that. So there's no harm in that. And honestly, there's no expectation that you know everything on this subject. Because that happens to all of us. Because sometimes the questions are very specific, and sometimes they're kind of nuanced, and sometimes they're kind of technical. In your case, they might not be. But in some of the cases, they might ask you a technical question, and you just don't have a clue. Well, you don't make up an answer to them, because then they won't ask you again. But if you tell them, I don't know, but I can find out, or I'll bring it back to you, then by God, you can. And then they'll be glad that they have it. And I've done that too. I think I told the story last year. I can think, let's see, 35, I can think of one time. Yeah, one time, that's pretty good, 34. One time that I was wrong on the stand. And I gave a wrong answer to it was about tax increment finance districts and what the application was of some particular obscure thing, and I was wrong. I thought I knew the answer, and I told them the answer, and I went back and looked, because I just sitting there, I was wrong. And I went back and told every one of the committee members I was wrong. I said, you know what, I gave you the wrong information, and that's on me, my bad. Here's what the real answer is. And even though, I don't know if that made me look stupid, or if it made me look honest, but you know what, they appreciated the fact that I went back and told them that I was wrong. And they knew that I wasn't going to do it again, or if I was, I would tell them. So there's really no wrong answer for you in this particular case. And so the other part of not only the who and the how is that, like anything else, stories matter and life experiences matter. You can talk in generalities and you can talk in platitudes, you can talk about stuff, but that's not going to resonate so much as your own personal experience. So you all are your own subject matter experts. And the other part about that that's kind of comforting is that there's no wrong answer when it comes to your situation, when it comes to what you're going through, when it comes to the issues that you're facing, when it comes to what's going on with your family and your kids and whomever. You know more about that than they do. And you're not wrong. Your experience is unique to your own. And your experience is your own, but your experience is sincere and is profound. And that's not wrong. So they're going to be compelled by stories. They're going to be compelled by effect. They're going to be compelled by impact because they're going to be thinking about how you tell it and what it matters to you. But they're going to be thinking about people that they know in a similar spot or like-minded folks. And they're going to be thinking about other people. So the fact that it's intimidating, I get that. But the fact that you don't have a lot of experience working, it's so much to your advantage. And so when you tell your story to them, you want to make sure that it's personal. And there you get into a little bit of the TMI stuff. I mean, you don't have to give them all the details because there's a little bit, it's like, oh my God, I've got to listen to this for so long. But there's also a case of where they need to know the personal impact. They need to know the personal effect because they're going to want to know how this stuff affects you. It's like, you know what? And so for our purposes, we give it to them in a sense that, you know what? These things have an impact. The stuff you're doing here has an impact on real lives. And here's what it did. Here's what happened. Here's how that manifested. Or we can't get money. We can't get an application filled out. We can't find an advocate in the schools. We can't find somebody to help us with the stuff. There's no technical assistance available. We can't get answers. That's the kind of stuff that matters and that they're going to be interested in, and they will advocate for you. And they really, really will, because they really want it to work for you. And in your particular case, your fallback is your own lives and your own experience, because they can't quibble with that. Are they going to tell you, no, you're wrong? Well, no, they can't, because it's your deal. And there's no wrong answer to that. That's the life you're living. That's the reality that you're living in. That's the experience that you have going on. They can't argue with that. They can't say, no, it's not. Well, of course it is. So they just don't. So your life experience and your history and the stuff that's going on in your lives is to your advantage. And you can, I'd say you can sell that, but I mean, that's going to resonate with them. And because they're really, really going to want to hear, and they're very receptive to that type of stuff. And for your purposes, it's defensible, because you get a position to where you're off on some shaky ground about some policy effect. It's like, well, what do you think of this? Well, I've never heard of it. Well, how's it going to be? I don't have a clue. Don't know. Doesn't matter, because what does matter is what you're asking for and what's going on in your lives, and they can't argue with it, because that's your experience, and they're going to know it's your experience, and they can't quibble with you. So you're already at an advantage because you're coming here as an occasional, and then you're doubly advantaged because your life experiences are compelling and they matter to them. And so some of the stuff you're all going through is a big deal, and they get it. They just don't know what the answer is. They just don't know what the solution is. So if I could wave a wand, what would it be? I don't know. What would it be? You know how it goes. There's no silver bullet to some of this stuff. There's no single answer that cuts across some of the questions that you've got, some of the issues that you've had. There's no single thing. They're going to want one. They're going to try to find one. In the absence of that, little tiny incremental change can have a pretty big impact as time goes on. And you can get that done with them. You really can. Yeah.
You asked if we have lobbyists for years, whoever. And some of the best lobbyists have been parents that have gone together and advocated together and bonded together and partnered and actually they were partners. Last year is an example of family support, how a group of parents got together and met with legislators and got a lot of
Turn the
things
place
done.
upside down.
they got a study. They got requested a study that was completed. And so, I
And
mean,
picked up
a
Jack
group of
Colbeck,
parents
picked up
can
an
do
advocate.
a lot of things if you get together and create a group. I mean,
Well, and you discover that you've got friends that you didn't know about. Wasn't Kean Williams one of those?
what's that?
Didn't Kean one of those? Didn't you run into that? We had Joel Dexter, was a former majority leader. Joel had a special needs daughter, who was just a jewel, and Joel was, so until you know what's going on in their lives, you might have friends in there that they just don't share, like it goes. You don't wear that stuff in your sleeve. You just live your life and you do your thing. And
It's
but
amazing
you've got a lot
how
of
many
friends.
legislators have siblings or, you'd be surprised how many have siblings with developmental disabilities that you don't know about.
You've got a lot more friends than you really think about because they just don't advertise. Because you don't either. It's just one of those things. You just kind of buckle down and you just go. They're the same way. Well, we've got friends in that room. So they're going to get it. So in your particular case, so if you remain, and I've got all my kind of my do's and don'ts of my stuff. So you're your own subject matter expert. And really, you know more than anybody else, and there's nothing you can say that's wrong in that particular case. You can belabor the point. You can do it to where they get turned off. You can be obnoxious about it. You can push hard. You can never give up. You can call them 50 times a day. I mean, it's not hard to figure out how that becomes counterproductive. But by and large, they're starving for information on pretty much every subject. Your subject, you know more than anybody else in the universe. And you've probably got a lot of like-minded friends downstairs that are going through the same thing that it's going to resonate with, that you don't even know that you've got. They're going to want to help because they understand some of the challenges that come along. They don't know what the answer is. They wish they could. They would wave a wand themselves if they could. It's just, you can't. So, but you got a lot of friends downstairs. So your job, in the absence of legislation, that's almost even easier. So the first thing you do when we get out of here, you don't have to do it like first thing, like in the next 10 minutes, but when you're going home tomorrow, you can do it sometime next week. Mary Kay gave me the list of who your legislators are. It'd be real easy to send them an email. They're all got emails all on the legislative website, so cannot find them. They're all in the book. Send them an email and said, I just got to tell you that we had the coolest experience in Pier. Then we got a chance to see you guys in the Capitol. We got introduced to the Rotunda. I was in going, class with a bunch of other parents and some of the other advocates and really enjoyed it. Would you be okay if an issue come up that I've got an interest in my reaching out to you? And guarantee you they would say yes. And so make an introduction when you come out of here. Do that because they're going to beg you for your input. And then just keep reading the stuff, reading the bills. Pay attention to your groups. You can, if you don't want to lobby yourself, then I'll go into a little bit of the why you need to, because there's a couple alternatives here. And now understand that I was poli-sci, I've always loved this kind of stuff. So I love this stuff. So accept my bias too. Is you either can just stop complaining about it, which you can do that, and just accept the fact that whatever happens, we're just going to live with it. That's one way. Or you can dial in a little bit and you can engage. There's an old saying that says, we get the government that we deserve. Well, you know what? If we're not participating, then we're not in a position we can really bitch about it much. So, and in South Dakota, at least, they're not prima donnas. They're not getting rich off of it. They're not trying to serve any larger agenda. They're just really good people try to figure stuff out. And they need subject matter experts. So your position where they need you, by and large, they're going to be pretty receptive. And you can have an influence. We won't have the time today, but I've got a list of, and there are more stories than anything, but there's no shortage of times that either people or circumstances has turned this place totally on its head, where they came in and a bunch of citizens just turned the place upside down. We're sitting on this side of the Senate. Okay, we were staying where we stood in the back of the Senate when we were kind of doing a little bit of the nickel tour before I came in. Okay, chelation, any of you familiar with chelation? It's kept Keith Richards alive all these years. Chelation is a process where we take your blood out, we clean it, we replace it. So there's a handful of people believe it's kind of voodoo science. There's the medical community is totally nervous and skeptical about it. So chelation, you can do chelation in South Dakota, but not because the medical community embraced it, because probably 6, in this particular case, I'll say little old ladies, which sounds kind of demeaning, but they're probably all 70, 80 years old, would sit and do quilts in the back of the Senate, doing quilts, and all they did is they came to committee and said, look, we don't know if this thing works. We're not scientists. We're not doctors. But you know what? My husband did it, and he's still alive. And my brother did it, and he's still alive. And so the docs fought him, the medical association fought him, every medical community, the Averas and the Sanford all came out of the woodwork to kill him because it's not science. We don't know if we believe it. This thing is crazy. And it was 5 ladies quilting in the back of the Senate and the House that just turned the whole place upside down. And they passed it because they said, you know what? Yes, we're with you. And there's no shortage of stories like that. So you can absolutely turn this place upside down. You can rock every one of the hardcore lobbyists. You can rock every one of the community if you've got a story that's compelling and you can tell. We've got, we just celebrated Martin Luther King Day. That gentleman was a black rodeo clown that did a lot of business in South Dakota, was traveling through South Dakota. He's a rodeo clown and loved South Dakota. And came here and sat in front of the committee and said, look, I know that people believe because we haven't done Martin Luther King Day in South Dakota, they think we're racist. And I'm here to tell you, as somebody that does a lot of business in South Dakota, that's got a lot of friends in South Dakota, that has traveled South Dakota for years and years and years, I've never met anyone in South Dakota that's racist. You are the most kind, forgiving, welcoming people that I know. My best friends are here in South Dakota. He said, well, what do I tell my friends outside of South Dakota that says, because you're not passing MLK Day, that by God, you've got something against blacks? And they all said, I don't know. You're right. Maybe you're right. And so, by God, we got it. We did it because he just said, what do I tell him? Because I know it's not the truth. I know it's not. They just turned the place upside down. So that's just a pair. There's a lot of stories up here of where sometimes the moment, sometimes the person, sometimes the group, but they'll rally around a cause or they'll rally around a person or they'll rally around an issue. There's a long time, I've got a lot of friends. I represent the funeral directors for a long time. Jonesboro Church. We're showing up and we're protesting at the death of military service members that were dying. So we had a guy that had died in Huron, and they were going to do full-blown military service for him in Huron. And so the Jonesboro Church guys were coming out, West Baptist Church, Jonesboro, West Baptist Church. We're coming out, we're doing really, really lewd, obnoxious, awful demonstrations at all of those service memorials. So our guys, in one day, I don't know that that's ever happened, in one day, passed a bill out of committee, shoved it off the floor, moved it over to the other house, passed it out of the other committee, passed it off the floor, and in one day got a governor's signature on it that said, look, we're not going to prohibit you from coming to South Dakota and protest because we believe in your First Amendment right to speak. But we're going to create a safe zone away from the cemetery because, by God, we're also going to honor our service members, and you're not going to be doing it with their family members around. So we're going to put you 100 yards away from everybody. You want to come up, raise as much hell as you want, but you're not going to be doing it in those family member spaces. And they passed it in one day, and that never happens. So, floor committee floor, one day. And that never happens, but they did it that day because they just said they were going to come out and protest. And our guys said, that's just not right. So there's no shortage of times that this big old incremental moving, slow moving bureaucracy that we live in can get nimble for the right cause and the right thing. So you're in the same spot. Everybody's got situations, everybody's got stories, but they will absolutely turn this place on its head if they can if they can figure out a fix or if there's a need for it, because they sincerely want to do the right thing and they sincerely want to help. So sometimes it surprises you. You get frustrated and you get angry, and it's just the nature of the deal. I mean, it's just the way that it is, because it's sometimes just such a big behemoth that it's hard. But be comforted, I guess, or at least excited at the opportunity, because if you're right and you got a story and you've got an ask that they can get around, they're gonna try to accommodate you as best they can, because they just do it and they've done it all the time. So you have so many friends down there. So okay, so you get a sense of who they are. You get a sense. So the process is always the same: committee floor, gov. So what happens is that as those arguments go on, the arguments get a little more sophisticated, they get a little more defined. And then what will happen is that it comes off the second floor. Well, might be a completely different animal that passed the one floor. You know, a House bill passes the House, comes over to the Senate, they make a bunch of changes, and so then they send it back over. It works that way. House bills come out of the House first, comes over to the Senate. If you make any changes, they send it back over to the House to say, are you guys okay with these changes? Same thing in reverse. It's a Senate bill, committee floor, you make a change, they'll send it back over. And if they say, no, we don't like those changes, then they'll put a committee together and they'll reconcile the changes. So the process is always the same. And you have an opportunity all throughout that process to be talking to legislators throughout that whole thing. So committee floor, and then, so figure that that's not enough betting, that I said goofy stuff doesn't pass, figure that. So then it goes down to the Gov's office. So now the Gov's office is reviewing it. So you've got not only all this committee scrutiny and all the scrutiny on the floor, but now the Gov's office is looking at it. They either sign it or they veto it, or they'll send it back and tell them to fix it. So there's no way that really loopy stuff, no way, I can't say never, because it's happened once in a while, sometimes usually political reasons. But by and large, goofy stuff doesn't survive that process. And by and large, they will make sure that it's okay. But it also means that you have the opportunity throughout that whole thing to keep track of it and to watch. So on that LRC site, what you can do, and Bob will take you around on the site. The other cool thing about that, and it's one of those good news, bad news. The bad news is it's all more electronic and that stuff. But at the same time, that means that all of the old speeches are now archived, the ones when they were doing it. So from since we've had these microphones, it means that you can go back in history. If you can find a bill that's related to one that you're working on, you can literally go back and listen to the testimony. And you can listen to the proponents and you can listen to the opponents on both sides. And you can hear the stuff. So it's like a little tutorial. You don't even have to come up with anything of your own if you don't want to. I mean, you have your own circumstances. You're going to personalize your message. You're going to tailor it to yourself. But literally, if you have an issue that comes up or a subject matter that comes around, sometimes stuff comes around and around and around. And so you literally can climb onto that site and go back and look at the text, and you can listen to the old stuff. So you can listen to the proponent testimony. You can listen to the opponent testimony and get a pretty good sense of what you want to say from that, which is a pretty cool feature. It's none of that stuff used to be that way. There's a lot of old rules, but we used to walk around, all the stuff was in paper. At the end of the day, they would bring the pages and put them in the back, and all the amendments, they would put them in a notebook. Every day, there were 2 notebooks behind a legislator's desk that were this thick. You remember those days. Those 3-ring binders that were this thick, because everything they talk about, they had to turn to paper and they put it in a notebook so it was available for them to look at. So it wasn't online. It might have a 5-minute shelf life. It might be a 50-page bill with a 10-minute shelf life. But by God, we're going to put it in paper and put it in the notebook, because that's just the way that it was. Nowadays, we don't do that anymore. So they used to, at the end of the day, the pages would get together and put 3-ring binders together and would put everything that had been talked about to paper and put it behind their desk so it was available to them. Well, it means that you didn't have any of those old testimony available. You couldn't listen to the old stuff because it wasn't online. You didn't have it. It didn't exist. So it was only ops and files. We were the institutional memory. The legislators that weren't term limited were, or the lobbyists were. because we've been doing it forever and ever and ever. So sometimes we were. So in that particular case, it's the same thing. You become the institutional memory if you're watching it for a long time. Bob and I were talking about how old we're both getting. How many years have you been doing this?
During my career, 36.
Yeah. So how many of these fights have you seen in one form or another?
Pretty much all.
How many of them come back around every 3-4 years?
They take a cycle.
Yeah. It's not necessarily the same pattern, but it's not unusual. You'll get something that they'll really whack around in 1 year and they don't really get to closure, so they'll take another run at it the second year, and then it dies again, so then it goes away for 3-4 years, and then they'll come back and try it again. And then they'll try it for a year, and then they'll try it for a second year, and then it goes away for a year. So a lot of times it's the same issues. A lot of times they come back around. Sometimes it just takes more time than others, or more than one time to get them done. So it's, but that being said, the process never varies as far as the how a bill becomes law thing. It's fun. I was reading the sheet. I like the how a bill becomes law deal because there's a lot of things going on that don't show up on the sheet. I talked about the idea part, where it comes from. That's all good. The drafting part is all good too. When it says, you go right to the committee, it says committee's responsibility to examine the bill carefully, take testimony for and against. That's the same thing we've talked about. Send it to the floor, change it, kill it. That's the same thing. What this doesn't tell you, and where your role comes in, and where my role comes in as a lobbyist goes, is that it's a rare issue that we haven't talked to every committee member before they ever heard the bill. We don't necessarily know what the outcome is going to be, because a lot of times they'll tell you what they're thinking, but they're going to be a little bit close to, they might just, a lot of times they're non-committal because they don't want to make a commitment, or they want to tell you, look, I appreciate where you're coming from, but I want to hear the other side, which is awesome too. So, but if it matters or if it's consequential, we've talked to every committee member before it ever gets to that part in here. That doesn't show up in here. And that also means that by and large, we know how a bill is going to fare. But that also means for your purposes that you're in that same position. You can be talking to committee members either by email or by text or by phone or however, all the way up until this thing arrives before it's ever in committee, even afterward. I mean, you literally can be the subject matter expert on the shoulder of these guys telling them which way to go on some of this stuff. So that doesn't show up in here. But this process is always the same, and it doesn't change. And the reason it's the same is so that they can manage really the acrimony, because it does get hard as time goes on. And a lot of times it's just because you have a lot of them. I'll use the Carbon Summit stuff right now because that's a hot subject. There's a lot of landowners involved. So they want to hear from the landowners. So last year, I think they had 40, 50, 60 landowners come out. Well, what they'll tell you is that we don't need all 60 of you to tell us the same story. So why don't you guys kind of coordinate your testimony and identify 3-4 people that can tell us the long version. And then you can just raise hands so we know where everybody's at because we're glad you're here. Or let's not repeat your testimony. Why don't you not duplicate what we heard from here and what we heard from here? And why don't you guys kind of coordinate your testimony? So we do a lot of that. I've got one up tomorrow morning. We do the same thing. It's like, okay, you take this, you take this, you take this, because then you can kind of give them the full thing. But the process never, ever really changes from this. And the reason it doesn't is so that they can manage those people. You've got 60 people that are hot on the subject. You want to listen to them, and you need to listen to them, and they do. But at the same time, you got to manage those 60 people. They used to do it in a way that was a little more intentional, maybe a little more devious. We used to do night hearings. And the committee chairs would say, look, we're going to stay here till we've heard from everybody in the room. We're going to stay here until we've heard from all. You took the time to drive out, we're going to hear from all. So we would sit in those rooms, in like this room, until midnight, 1 o'clock in the morning, until everybody was dozing off and delirious and tired and pissed. And it's like, this is awful. But then they can sincerely say, look, you took the time to drive to Pier. We're going to listen to everything you want to say. And they will let people get up here and let them just go on and on and on and on, which is kind of awesome because they took the time and they have the opportunity. But everybody, you get 60 people telling the same story, you kind of get it after the first few. And it gets to kind of redundant, and then by then everybody's getting tired of it. But they don't do that much anymore.
I thought
Now-
this paperwork says 5 minutes,
That was what?
that you get 5 minutes.
Well, it depends on the issue.
Oh,
If you get 60 people there, they'll give you 5 minutes.
okay.
Will does that, and Will's pretty good at state affairs. We'll say, okay, we've got 6 bills up this morning. So we're here for 2 hours. So we're gonna try to spend about 20 minutes on each, best guess. So we're gonna limit the proponents to 10, and we're gonna limit the opponents to 10. They'll try to give everybody kind of the same amount of time. And then you do the best you can to kind of abide within the time. So if there's 60 of you, they'll either do that, they'll say, look, we're just gonna give you a couple minutes. Or they'll say, look, why don't you all just sign in the back so we know where the group feels and where you're all at on the thing. We don't need to hear the commentary from everybody. If you're up here because you're PO'd, then you just then raise your hand, and then we'll know that's the case, because they don't need to hear all that stuff. So they'll limit it if they have to. If they've got unlimited time, and this time of year is interesting, what is it, education? I think there are a couple of them tomorrow. We're early enough in the process that there's not a lot of bills in. I think that one in education, they'll probably spend an hour and a half talking about one particular bill tomorrow. And there'll probably be 2-3 people on each side. And they'll spend an hour and a half on it. So they would do that to all of them if they could. But we're doing 500 bills in 38 days. They just don't have the time for it. The other thing is that it's kind of unique to South Dakota, not entirely, but kind of for us, is that every bill gets a hearing. They've got what they call pocket vetoes in a lot of states. If you brought me a bill and I think it's just trash and I'm the committee chairman, I'm going to put it in my pocket and no one will ever even see it. They won't even know you introduced it. In South Dakota, every bill gets a hearing. So whether it's a good one or a bad one, you put a bill in, we're going to talk about it. Every bill gets a hearing. You can see, I'm told my phone is ringing in my hearing aids. Make sure that wasn't Aaron coming up at 4 o'clock. So they will limit you if they have to. They would just assume not. But every bill gets a hearing. So they're going to do the best they can to give you all the time that you need. But, I mean, state affairs has been 6-8 bills. So they did it yesterday, and we'll do it again tomorrow. We're just going to say, look, we've got 6 bills. We're going to try to hear them all this morning. We've got 2 hours, so let's do 20 minutes on each. So we're going to give 10 minutes to the proponents. So then if there's 60 of you got to figure out how to use 10 minutes with the 60 of you. So it's sometimes they will be as accommodating as they can be, but sometimes that part's a real challenge. It's a good thing because things move along. It's a bad thing because a lot of times I live in Pierre. We're used to 3 hours to everywhere. I mean, it's like, I'm going to spend the time to drive. Well, you're going to spend, it's a day lost to work coming out here to do a thing. And congratulations, you never even heard from me? That doesn't sit very well with a lot of people. But at the same time, you got 50 bills in your thing and you're all stacked up and you want to get them done. So you got to kind of strike a balance on that. So, the other part about that is that the big committees meet Monday, Wednesday, Friday. So some committees only meet Tuesdays and Thursdays. So you probably build deadlines. There's probably not very many committee hearings that are going to meet the Tuesday, Thursdays. They probably are going to have probably 8 or 10 committee meetings before, they start moving bills over. So, yes,
I
ma'am.
just have a question, so you're talking about, somebody comes in and speaks to the committee.
Yeah.
But then when do the appropriations happen? Is that later?
Oh, that's so much fun. Do you keep your checkbook at home? Who keeps the checkbook for you guys? Do you? Do you keep your checkbook?
Yeah, right.
Yeah, I do in our house. That was one of those, after the kids were born, it's like, okay, I do everything, you do nothing thing, so I get the checkbook. So the checkbook is mine. Appropriations meets all the time. Appropriations committee meets every day. Committee, they meet a lot of times off session, around session. There's our 4 o'clock date right out there. So a lot of them will meet outside. Come on in, Aaron. Hey, come on in. So We just had a question about appropriations, and I'll introduce Aaron. So they meet all the time. They
I wasn't
also,
sure if it was the same thing or.
when I said that a lot of legislators would just assume to the checkbook, and the reason I asked that question, there's a lot of legislators that see the world through their checkbook. Because what they would say is that checkbook is going to reflect, you spend your money on the things that matter. And the checkbook is the best reflection of what matters to us because we either fund it or we don't. If we don't fund it, we can give it all the lip service we want. If we run a check, it doesn't matter. So there's a lot of legislators that kind of see things through a financial prism. Well, and then the legislators, that was probably the first one of the early places they started pushing back on the governor, because what would happen is that they would come in and the governor would present the budget. So here's the governor's budget. So that becomes the outline that they're working off of. Well, that's awesome, but it means it's the governor's budget. So they're trying to make amendments and they're making changes to something that was handed to them. And they said, no, we're not going to do that. We're going to hire our own staff and we're going to do our own budget. And then we'll reconcile that with the governor's budget, because they thought they had their own feelings. So they'll meet nonstop all the way through session. And then they started expanding their meetings. Now they meet more. They were rolling the first day of session they met. They meet during the summer. They meet now quite often, and they're checking projections and they're doing financials and they're doing checkbooks. But what will happen is that they'll do all those hearings. Nowadays, they make so many requests. If someone comes because of the electronic stuff, they will make enough requests of the agencies. Who was up today? Public safety was in front of appropriations today. So they'll spend 2 hours doing a root canal on public safety. But they make public safety answer this long questionnaire before they ever walk into the room. Where the money goes. How do you spend your time? How many FTEs have you got? How much federal cash runs through there? What do you do with the match? What are your priorities? Where are you short? What are your needs? And they do a really, really thorough job, more so than they ever had in the past, of dissecting a lot of that stuff before the agencies walk into the room. And then they'll spend an hour or two. Usually there are 2 agencies, so usually they do an hour per, but they'll meet all morning. And you never see them. The appropriators are like vampires. They come out, their skin is just white, and they never come out. And so they come out and they don't get to hear any of this policy discussion. They are hearing pros and cons as it pertains to the checkbook and the finances stuff. And they're only doing checkbook. They don't get to all the policy, proponent, no opponent kind of stuff. They miss all of that stuff. So they're a little challenged when it comes. But they just sit down in that appropriations room. They're just pinned to it pretty much the whole session. And so then in the end, they will come out and they tabulate all the asks that come along. They'll do all the agency stuff, and then they'll add up all of the asks, and then keep a running list of how much they think they can satisfy. And then they'll kick stuff off the list and throw stuff onto the list. So it goes on simultaneously with all the other stuff. And then in the end, they pass the appropriations bill. So it runs simultaneously the whole time. And most of the ones that are there are kind of those people that see the world through their checkbook. Bless their heart, because nobody wants to be in appropriations because it's a miserable job. It's just a dismal job. It's just,
Yesterday was
But-
DHS's, the DD's budget hearing. So it was interesting. That's
yeah.
the disability bill. That's the day that you want to listen. Is yesterday's budget hearing.
Did they?
So it was interesting.
So that runs simultaneously, and they do their own thing. So they don't sit in the other committee hearings. They just sit in their thing. And it used to be, it's changed a little, not a lot. But, in a case of where there's always more asks than there is money available, they would tell you in the old days. Now, we got a little fat briefly there because of the COVID cash and the other money that came in that we all kind of got a little fat on. But they would say in the old days, it used to be no, 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 hell no, no way in hell, no, 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 no. Now there's an occasional yes sprinkled in there, because mostly their job was just to say no to other stuff. So they would use the appropriators. They would send bills over to appropriations to die because they would just say, no, we don't have the money for it. Then they don't have to win an argument on the merits. Then you don't have to win. That might be a good idea. We just can't afford it now. That is brilliant. Wish we had the money for it. That is so fabulous. Oh, we just can't afford it. Oh, I love that. Oh, can't afford it. So they kill stuff with that. So that's the nature of their deal. Yeah. Yeah. So not dissimilar to a lot of our home checkbooks going through the same analysis. Oh, that sounds fabulous. And oh, we can't afford it, so we're not gonna do it. Well, that's the same way they do it up here. And so a lot of them, you have to be kind of a different mindset to work appropriations. It's kind of, we laugh about it, it's kind of like mandatory military service. I think they all ought to serve on appropriations for a year or two just because it's so dismal that not only would they have a little better sense of the checkbook, but they would appreciate the policy stuff more. And it would be good for them as legislators, but most of the ones are there, the ones that kind of see stuff in that way, and look at stuff through the financial prism. So, yeah, but they're a different breed, most of them are. So any other questions from that sort of stuff? Anything grab you? Anything that you just wonder? And then I'll introduce Aaron and we'll figure out what we're gonna do. Nothing really? Is it kind of what you thought? Does it seem, yeah? If I can do it, you can do it. Yeah, I would
It'll
think
make
so.
more sense after tomorrow, I promise you. After doing tomorrow's stuff, it'll all make more sense.
They've got one of their, all right, so I looked at, I'm going to introduce Aaron. Okay, the gentleman standing in the back here. Okay, now, I'm a lobbyist for the industrial electric utilities. All of the companies have their own lobbyists. Aaron is the lobbyist for Black Hills Energy. He's a former city, is it a councilman or counselor? What do they call him on Rapid?
Councilman, alderman.
Former councilman / alderman out in Rapid City. So he's a fairly big deal. He is, of our group, he's the youngest and the tallest. How many years have you been doing this?
This is my 6th year doing government affairs.
Yeah. But he was an elected official before that. So he's good at it. He's in charge of Rapid City and the Black Hills delegation. So he deals with a little, they're a little kookier than a lot of the other folks. You got a fairly strong, willed and independent to live out Bales nowadays. And Aaron kind of fits that. So this particular group, you've got parents and advocates. They don't have any particular issues this year, which is awesome. So what we've been talking about is a little bit, I told you downstairs, is kind of the who, what, and why. And the who. So tomorrow, you've got a handful of bills that you guys are going to be proponents and opponents on. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay, so one of those is one that we had an interest in and we sat through the hearing.
Yeah.
One of those was term limits for the PUC commissioners. So what the group's going to do tomorrow is a little bit of their own testimony. So they're going to do mock testimony in front of the committee. You've got Drew, who else is helping?
So we
Reynolds?
have Will, Drew, Brian Mulder, Orrin Westmeister, Peyton Whitman, who am I missing? Aaron Healy,
Yeah.
Senator Nesbitt, Senator,
So
Crabtree,
R's and D's,
Casey Crabtree,
male, female,
yeah.
wide range of age.
Yep.
What
We've
they
got
share
an
is,
even amount of Democrats and an even amount of Republicans.
so it's very politically correct,
Yeah.
very balanced approach,
I like it.
very clever.
Yeah.
Yeah, not
They
a
like to
first
banter each
rodeo.
other.
Never experienced.
Yeah, exactly,
If you
yeah.
get a chance, come over because they banter each other back and forth. It's a lot of fun. Mary Duvall is one of the coaches. So she, in fact, last year she sat in on the panel for a while. One of the legislators was late, so she sat in for a little bit. That was a lot of fun.
So Mary Kay gave them a handful of bills that they're gonna go ahead and represent tomorrow.
They
And
haven't
they'll
seen
do,
them
so,
yet.
so they'll get proponents. They're gonna do, so you're gonna do the committee version of it? You're gonna do the committee testimony version of it? Are you gonna be doing the hall conversation version of it? You're gonna do it with the up close? So it's all pretty much committee tomorrow, right?
Yeah.
Okay, okay.
Yeah.
So figuring that one of the topics that we watched with some interest, so I don't know who's gonna, have you guys drawn the topics yet? I mean, you've got the topics, but have you divided them up yet?
I have.
So
They don't know.
has
They don't
anybody
know.
else seen
They
them?
don't know yet.
I don't wanna tip anybody off, because I wanna take one of those that we aren't interested in. Like, you
Well,
know.
I was
But
gonna say, how about 5001? That's kind of similar, maybe a little bit.
Oh,
You know.
that was a fun one. That one we watched
That was
yesterday
fun.
too. That was a fun one. That was hot.
Which
That was
one?
very hot.
Which one?
5,000.
Which
Yeah,
Yeah, House Bill 5001.
House Joint Resolution.
Was it a resolution?
yeah,
Oh,
it was
a
a share.
resolution.
That was, yeah, it was a
Yeah, that
share.
was, resolution.
All right.
Just as an example, I don't know,
That's a fun one. Is that on your list or is
No,
that not?
no, it's not.
Okay, okay, we can do
That's why I
that
don't
one.
wanna do any
Because we
other
said,
ones,
okay, all right. Well, then I won't, because I would absolutely give somebody a tip off if we
What
did.
else could we, what other?
No, that's a good one. So let me have to show of hands. How many Republicans in the room? Okay, okay, okay. That's not an uncommon feeling.
Yeah.
Okay,
That's
so
one of
the
the
issue,
primaries.
so the issue with the Republicans, and it was fun because the Dems kind of called them out on it. The issue for the Republicans is that right now, they put all of their candidates for the general election, they pick them at the party convention. And the reason for that, and we heard testimony from all sides, the reason for that is most ordinary citizens don't care who that nominee is. They expect a party to figure it out. You guys know your candidates are, you guys do the vetting. We'll trust you or whatever you decide on. Not my job. I don't know all these people, not my thing. So go ahead, we'll let the party decide. So what happened at the last Republican convention, there's a little bit of a war going on amongst the Republicans. I say this with love, but I'll call them the flat earth contingent, and then I'll call them the economic Republicans. Because there's a lot of people that are just Republicans because, like, you know what, leave us alone, spend as low as you can, less is more when it comes to government. And there's a lot of other Republicans that figure this grand Republic experiment is going off the rails, and unless I intervene and switch our morality clock and fix it somehow, that the whole world's gonna blow up. So the Republicans are pretty divided amongst themselves, and that shows up on the House here floor all the time. So hardcore division amongst the Republicans. So last year at the convention, the convention, Monet Johnson, nice woman, Secretary of State, they tossed the incumbent Secretary of State and put Monet in that position to run for the general election. Steve Haugard, who was a former Speaker of the House, ran against Governor Noem in the primary, but there were enough conservatives at the convention that he came within a vote or two of being her lieutenant governor, because they almost tossed Larry Roden over the side to put Haugard in as lieutenant governor. And they're going, wait a minute, we can't do that. We got to pick. So one of the solutions they suggested, and one of the things, and it goes to this resolution, is that, look, let's not let the party decide their nominee. Let's let the people decide. Well, there are a lot of people that are going, I don't know, you guys decide. I don't want to get involved with this. So the people were a little bit all over the map on it. But so one of the solutions was just exactly this. On the November ballot, if HJR 501 would have passed, then there would have been a November measure where you all would have gotten decided whether the Republican Party should do it by primary or do it by convention. You can let them pick themselves, and then you'll decide in November. Or are you guys going to do it by a vote at the primary in May? And they were going to let the people decide that. And it was hot because the Republicans themselves are divided about it. And it was fun. The Dems just used it just to pimp them the whole time during the committee. It was just high comedy. It's like, wait a minute, you bringing your party squabbles to us? Come on, we're not going to fix you. So it was really kind of fun in the committee. But it was really pointed. It was hot. It was, were you sitting in that one?
No,
you were trying to get back to Colorado. Yeah, I said it.
When the former Republican chair was all for it, except.
They had, I think, they put a letter together of like 7 of the last 9 Republican chairs were, supportive of it because what they said, it was too fun. We've got friends that was the treasurer of the party and said, you know what, I showed up. They were so upset that some of these crazies, I'll call them crazies, and I've got friends in that group. I have a lot of those friends, a lot of those crazies are my friends and wouldn't even be offended if I called them crazy. I've got
Just run out crazy.
Yeah. So what happens is that for those guys, we've got a friend that's a treasurer said, I show up to the convention, it's like in cars, the parking lot is full. Cars were circled around the lot. They're parking blocks away. They got cars on the grass. I mean, the place is just packed. And our guy walked in and says, thank God enough ordinary people showed up that this thing isn't going to be a free-for-all, and discovered that it was the crazies that all showed up. It's like, oh no, it is a free-for-all. So it was absolutely a free-for-all at the last convention. So they brought the fix here, and they were going to let the people decide. So that was the thing. So there's your issue, legislators, tomorrow. Would you, depending on your feeling, would you rather let the voters do it by primary? Would you rather let the parties pick? That's your issue. And just like everybody's got a story, every issue's got two sides. Sometimes every issue's got more than one or two or three or four sides. That's one of those things. So not only do you have to reconcile your own feelings about the issue, but then you have to decide you want to let the voters decide what that is. Because what happens up here a lot is that congratulations, we'll put something on the ballot because the voters are going to decide. But then where's your campaign? How are you going to actually learn about that discussion? How are you going to have that issue? There's going to be nobody's going to put money on that. The parties, I don't know what even happens in a campaign with them if they did it. A lot of times they put stuff on the ballot because they can, and then nobody ever supports a campaign and ends up getting it just shoved right up their nose. It's like, well, you didn't tell anybody the story. So not only do you have to figure out which way you are, but then you have to decide whether or not you're going to trust the people to decide where that outcome should be. So it's a fun issue, and that's a really good example. So, okay, so Aaron and I, so that being the case, Aaron and I can play a little bit. I don't know if we go by committee or just by hallway stuff. So Senator Costello,
Mr. Willard?
you got a minute to talk about HCR
Super
501?
busy, but I got a minute. Yeah.
I appreciate that. Have you read the bill? Have you read the resolution? Have you? Have you been following it? Do you understand the issue?
Is this the one about primaries?
Yeah, it is,
Yeah,
exactly.
okay, so I'm familiar with the issue.
Yeah, okay. Do you got feelings about it?
I was at the last convention, but man, it was wild.
Were you there with all the crazy bastards, or are you with all the good guys? Okay, you might not want to use that one.
I'm friends with everybody, Steve.
Yeah,
That's the funny
okay,
thing about me.
okay, yes, you are. I'm not surprised. Yeah, you might. So point being is that you want to get a sense of where they're at. You want to do more listening than talking. So you're trying to get a sense of it. Say, okay, so you've got it up and tomorrow. So have you talked to anybody else about it? Are they working you pretty hard?
There's opinions on both sides, and what we're really wondering, since there's people who aren't in the party that's affected, like how are they going to get that?
What do you think of that? You were at the last one. You think they should have an effect?
It kind of feels like it's just our own fight. I don't know if this is really the issue, the place to solve that. Plus, it's only one convention, right?
Is that an outlier, or is that a pattern, or is that a regular thing?
I mean, so you know my background. I'm a science engineering nerd, so
He is an engineer. So the legislative stuff is occasionally a challenge to Aaron, because he likes stuff that's fairly orderly.
I'm also an unconventional engineer.
Yeah.
So what that one instance is just one instance. So I'm trying to decide if there's a problem that we need to fix, or if this is just a one-off thing.
So are you leading any particular direction?
Right now, I'm almost thinking like as a grand experiment. Let's see what happens next convention, and if it's still a problem, I mean that'll be a big pain to go through that twice.
Wait and see if the pattern.
But if it's a
whether it's an
pattern,
outlier,
then we'll
whether
have a
it's a
problem that
pattern.
we have to solve. Yeah. Although personally, I am conflicted. When I first came to the state, I was really confused about not being able to vote with primaries for some of these. So I also have that.
Sure.
And I haven't heard a lot from my constituents about it yet either.
Oh, really? That's awesome.
Yeah. I don't know if it is or not. They're not watching it, so maybe it's not important for them.
So you're going to hear that too, whether or not he's heard from anybody, whether or not anybody cares. In your particular case, depending on your issue, you could be the one that cares. I can follow around in this particular case, and it happens a lot with issues. Have you heard anything from Mary Kay Budmeyer? I know she follows the stuff she's going to read. Have you heard anything from Mary Kay?
No, but maybe I missed it.
See, in your particular case, they would, because they would be able to circle back around with your message, and they'd be able to say, well, you know what I have. I said, well, you should talk to her, because she's got feelings about this, or she's got experience in this particular issue. You want to get a sense of where they're at. You want to get a sense of where they're leaning. If you can get a commitment, that's gold, but that's harder than it used to be. A lot of times they'll try to kind of keep their powder dry just because they want to keep their options open as to not to disappoint you. A lot of times if it's hard, he'll tell you that I hate it, I don't like this idea, and you know what? Honestly, people will leave him alone then because you know where he's at and you don't care. because you know exactly that he's gonna be a no. So, and it's really about as simple as that. So depending on your issue, so then it just, depending on where you wanna get him, where it is. I can't make Aaron do anything. He's gonna have to wanna come along. Yeah, it just doesn't work that way. We've had times where, I can think of one time, and Arch Beal still tells the story. Were you here when I went and chewed Arch out after he chose that first year? Archie voted no on a bill that he told us, Archie voted yes on a bill that he told us he was gonna vote no on. And Archie's a pretty strong-willed guy, and he was brand new to the building. And he made a commitment the day before, he said, no, I'm an absolute no, and then he voted yes. And I circled back around to him. And I said, look, you can't do that. I said, we haven't met, and you don't know me from anybody, but you don't want to do that to yourself. Because first, you don't want to put yourself in a position that you're flipping. Second, if that vote would have mattered, then it could have gone the other direction. I said, now all these gooks that convinced you of the issue, now you're their champion. So you're going to be getting calls from all of them now because they're going to be talking to me now. I said, you can't do that. I said, if this would have mattered, and it was a 7-6 thing, then that would have changed the outcome to this deal. I said, you can't do that. You can't put yourself in that position. You don't want to be a reputation of that. If you're a no, then you stand by your no. If you're a yes, then you stand by your yes. Because you should. You need to be consistent. I said, it'll serve you better. Archie made me tell that story. So first he went over to the other lobbyists and said, who's the barking dog? Which was me. But he's also made me tell that story to other legislators. And he said, I'll never forget it, because he did. He was slipping. So if you can get a sense of where they're at, if you get a commitment, that's great. But depending on your issue, you just want to establish a relationship. You want to make sure that you're talking. You want to get where his sense is. So in this particular one, so if I'm Mary Kay's, if I'm the particular one, is that, that issue? If I'm trying to get him home, so Aaron, I'm getting the impression that he's still listening. That he's got maybe a bias, but he's kind of listening to both sides. So he's keeping his options open. So if I really wanted to support it, then that just means I've got to take a little different tack. And I can't make him do anything. It's like, have you seen the letter from all the past party chairs? Because you're right. I mean, the question that is definitely an outlier, and this one was a little bit crazy, but you think that seven of the 9 past chairs signed on the letter. You think that those persons are best positioned to be able to make the decision on this thing going forward? Would they be the experts as much as we got an expert?
They certainly have the experience, but I still would go back to, it's been one experience, right?
Right.
So
Right.
That's where I'm off.
Yeah.
What I am getting the impression though, Steve, is that you have a position on this. So
I-
what are your feelings?
I don't want the crazies to rule. I probably wouldn't use that either. It's a case of where, I do. We've talked about it a lot as far as, and it's absolutely a flip thing. My particular take on this issue is that party ought to pick their own nominees, because I'm as involved as anybody, but I'm going to trust them to figure out who their advocates are. And I'm going to figure that I don't know the 300 people that go to the convention every year, but the way the process works is that you've got to convince those delegates. So it means they're doing grassrootsy stuff at the convention. It means that if those 300 people decide on something, I'm sure there's going to be cases where I don't know, where I don't agree with the decision. But by and large, 300 people that are committed to the party, that are there for a reason, that essentially ran to become a delegate, that have got a little bit of skin or a little bit of vested, I'm going to abide by their choice, because I'm not going to take the time and don't have the time to figure out which is the best candidate amongst all these other races. So it's like, let the experts decide, in my mind. I would defer to those guys. If you feel otherwise, I get it, but that's my opinion. I would come from that direction.
And that means a lot to me, because I know you are more involved than a lot of other people, and even at your level of involvement, you feel that you would trust.
So you think about so the other part to that is, if I'm thinking out loud, so I'm thinking out in the hills, what's a race cost out in the hills for somebody running for the legislature?
Oh man, tens and tens of thousands of dollars just for a small local race.
So a local race. So if I'm going to run for a statewide race, I'm going to be spending 10 times that, 20 times that.
Not, but
So how does an
maybe 5 or 6
individual,
times,
so how
but
does
yeah,
an
I don't know.
individual without cash, that is just a sincere candidate, knowledgeable candidate, if you're working the convention, you can do that person by person with virtually no coin, probably. But don't you exclude sincere candidates with their wits unless they've got the money to be able to run
On
a
the
statewide
statewide, it's
primary?
certainly more challenging than a district.
And how do you get money to the races that nobody cares about? Where do public utilities commissioners come up with the cash when you're that far down the ticket?
Or public lands.
Who would care about
Oh,
school
man,
public
school
lands? How
public
about treasurer
lands.
auditor?
Treasure and auditor probably get some attention. but
Maybe.
What's it like school public lands?
So wouldn't you
What's
exclude
the
people
idea?
that don't have the resources? If you did it by a statewide, isn't that gonna be kind of eliminated by itself?
I could see that being a challenge, yeah.
How about, does it also put you in a position where people with cash are gonna run somebody? Does that put us in a position where we're more vulnerable if somebody comes in with a couple $100,000 and a candidate? Wouldn't you rather
Seems like
trust the
that would be an
grassroots?
advantage. Seems like that would be an
That's to
advantage.
me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Especially in a statewide race where you're trying to cover like all the territory.
Well,
Yeah,
I'm
those are
gonna,
really good points, Steve.
I appreciate the time and I appreciate where you're coming from. I'll speak to it tomorrow. If you've got any questions, you've got my stuff. I'll circle around, so just circle back and I'll touch base. We'll talk about it tomorrow. But yeah,
And in
appreciate
the
the time.
meantime, I'll read the resolution and all.
Awesome,
Appreciate it.
cool. All right, well, I might touch back. I know you've got a couple guys in your district that care a lot. So if you're cool with that, I'll have one of them reach out and,
Glad to.
okay. It's really pretty easy.
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah, that's.
Steve,
that was-
yeah. No, this is why he's so good about it. And really.
I don't even know if
You know,
they have it
that's-
right.
that's so
what I'm
fabulous.
confused. I
Um,
downloaded some-
Let me say something about that. Is that because people have got lobbyists and like a bad name because we're all just pejorative. The truth is, and you think about for a second, now, you know who your reps are probably. But, and if you're a legislator tomorrow, let me ask you a question. Is there a dinner that's good enough to make you vote for whatever the issue is? You think that there's any, can I gift you with food and have it actually make any kind of impact at all on what your decisions are gonna be? I mean, it might be the greatest meal of all time. And even in that one,
Depends on where it's at.
like my absolutely drop dead favorite food. It's like, yeah,
There's some maybe.
yeah, yeah, if I'm willing,
Weekend coming up and you go to Vegas.
yeah,
Depends on where the
yeah.
meal is located.
What happens most of the time with those dinners, and we take legislators out all the time, is that we never ever are asking for anything at the time. Most of the time, they are so excited to talk about anything other than what's going on down here. They want to talk about kids and grandkids and ball games and other news. They just want to escape because it's a 38-day immersion that you're standing in front of a fire hose of issues. And it's like, oh my God, just get me out of there. So we absolutely take all the time, Colbeck at least is coming along. We'll have along tonight. But I don't know a legislator that would give you a vote for a good dinner. And the ones that I know that are good ones would be insulted by the idea that, hey, I just picked up that sandwich, so now you owe me, right? It's like, yeah, I don't think so. Yeah, so it just doesn't, it's too funny. It's absolutely the way. And we do it all the time. But we never, ever try to get a vote out of it. Yes, ma'am?
I just have a question then.
Yeah.
So it sounds like there's a lot of unofficial ways
Yes,
to advocate.
more than that.
And the only official way then would be sitting here in front of a committee. Is that correct?
Yeah, we'll call that option one, but I'm gonna give you a 1A. Which isn't in my stuff, but another way is with the agencies. You guys sat through the approach, you guys are talking about social services, and you're talking about some of the stuff they're doing. If you have got an agency that becomes an advocate for you, or you've got a state employee that you're involved with, that knows your issues, that wants to help, sometimes an awful lot of that stuff, you can find a proxy, an agency will run some of that stuff for you. So the agencies will come up here and they'll pitch it either themselves or they'll pitch it down to probes, and you can come along with that. So the official way really is if you're outside in, you're gonna do it with your legislator. So Aaron's gonna step up, and I've got a couple of them now. We've got bills that we're running. So depending on the legislator, a lot of times they'll say, look, I'll do that for you, but I'm not gonna do anything. So I'll introduce it, but you're gonna have to speak to it. You'll have to help. And I've got a couple of those now. So I'll drop it in for you, but you're gonna have to do the heavy lifting. So that'd be the official way one. But the 1A part of that is that, you know, I spent a lot of time, I'm working on a goofy thing now with Department of Revenue with motor vehicle license. The smartest person in the state on motor vehicle licenses is a young woman that runs that division. So she's writing language that at my ask that we're gonna go ahead and she's gonna help present. So you can do it through the agencies too. So you've got friends in the agencies. And that's where, I mean, with Colbeck thing, where did that all start with Jack and the approach? Did that start with approach? Where did the study start?
It started with those.
Yeah, yeah. So that's turned into a formal process
It started
that
where?
they spent the summer.
Appropriations.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So that really came through, that was less sitting up here than it was a legislator whose story resonated with, and then it turned into a summer study, and then it goes back through appropriations and the like. So yeah, there's a couple of official ways. The agencies are one, the legislators are probably a 1A, but you know, this is one. But you can get a lot of work done with the agencies too, or with legislators that care. So those would be the official ways. Because there's really only two ways. It comes either through the Gov's office and the executive agencies, or else from the legislature. So this way is the legislative way, and the other way is the agency stuff. All the bills come through that.
Or the emails that we would send, or the meetings we would have at
Yep.
Cracker Barrels, you're saying that's all kind of the unofficial way that we can get to know our
Yes.
legislators and make
Yeah,
connections
and that's
and
even,
build a good
they
relationship.
do a pretty good job. I've moderated the Cracker Barrel here in town a bunch. So we have people who will show up at the Cracker Barrels. And then, you know, with our legislators, and we've got a really good group of legislators. Will's going to be there tomorrow. So Will Mortensen, we've helped raise since Will was a child, is now the majority leader in the House side. So people will go to the Cracker Barrel and they'll sit and then they'll say, Will, have you got a minute? You know, after the Cracker, have you got a minute so I can talk to you about something? And so you can raise the issues of the Cracker Barrel. That's where you introduce yourself, you become familiar to him, you go to all those Cracker Barrels and you get a little bit of a presence. And so that is both official and unofficial. What that means then is that as time goes on, Will could become an advocate for you. Will can introduce legislation. And then he'll invite you to come and speak to it. He'll drop the bill in, but he'll ask you to come out and help. And that's when you do the speaking.
And they're not necessarily at a Cracker Barrel. For some of you that maybe live somewhere with a Cracker Barrel restaurant, I spent most of last year in this conversation like, huh? What? So it is called that.
It's because in the old general store days, they used to stand on the top of the barrel of crackers so you could shout out over the crowd. So it's literally a cracker barrel.
I'm like, you guys sure eat a lot.
Yeah, yeah. So when they used to sell crackers in barrels, yeah. So you stand out over the top.
2 weeks ago at, where was it? Queen City Bakery, and the representatives were there and whatnot, we talked to them.
Yeah, that'd have been a good one. They do, I think we do 3 or so, I think here. They try to, in Pier, they'll do a couple Pier, and then they'll do a couple in Highmore, and then they'll kind of move them around in the district. But yeah, they'll do them all during session. So the Cracker Barrels, and that's just exactly, that's where they come down and the legislators will sit up front and they'll ask some questions. I don't, does Rapid City, does Elevate them? Who does them there?
Yeah, Elevate Rapid City
Sure.
Road.
How many do they do?
This year they'll do 3.
Okay.
And you can just write your questions down and now they have a moderator, Steve.
Sioux Falls, yeah. The reason we had a moderator in Pier is because I said sometimes things get hot. I was sitting in the back, I tell you my Bailey story? I had taken my biggest Go Cup that I have, which is a large Go Cup. And I put a bunch of Baileys in it and a whole bunch of coffee. And I had my baseball cap on, and I'm wearing blue jeans, and I'm in the back of the room, comfortably sipping on my Baileys, being a good citizen, right there, just being there and representing at the Cracker Barrel. I wasn't working. I was just going to hang. I was just going to be a good citizen. I wanted to show the chamber that people actually come to this stuff. And I'm sitting in the back of the room, and this guy stood up next to me. We were well into it. Now, Pierce had a fairly conservative group of legislators. This particular group was Duval, Monroe, and Tim Rounds, who were, Jeff is really conservative, and Timmy and Mary are almost the same way. So they're really conservative. And so I'm sitting in the back comfortably. I'm just really nice. It was a nice casual Saturday morning. And this guy stood up in the back of the room and says, I think we've listened to you all talk long enough. It's time for you to listen to our demands. And that was everybody in the room went, whoa, where's this going to go? And then he just started ranting on his list of demands and about how liberal these three are and how out to lunch they are. And I'm thinking, this isn't even close to reality. This guy doesn't know what the hell he's talking about. These guys aren't liberal. They're not. This isn't even your audience. And we listened to him, and he just went off. And I don't know how long he lectured until finally I set my cup down, stood up and said, wait a minute, that's just not even, look at who you're talking to. And kind of knocked the guy down a little bit from the crowd. And so he kind of backed off. So then my penalty for that was I had to moderate the next 3 or 4 debates. So it's like, it's like, I think we've listened to you all long enough. It's time for you to listen to our demands. I mean, wait a minute, you didn't demand anything. This is crazy. But my God, so then I had to moderate. That was my penance for standing up and saving him that particular time.
Steve, can I add a thing or two about advocacy as lecturer? So you asked about the official and the unofficial aspects of advocating for your cause. To me, like, regardless of which avenue you're using, whether you're here or outside, it all hinges on the relationships that you are building with the lawmakers. So if you have something that you're passionate about and it's an ongoing issue, your efforts to build relationships with the people who are making those decisions should also be ongoing. So that when you talk to them, it's not the first time they've heard you or seen you. So I try to emulate that in Steve and my little mock conversation there, where it's like, okay, Steve, if that's your perspective, I know you. I know how involved you are, so your perspective means a lot to me. And as you are trying to advocate for your causes, that will move the bar, in my perspective, more than anything else.
You're your own subject matter expert.
Exactly. And as that becomes more well-known, people will take what you say more to heart.
Examples of that is I just got a letter from one of the senators a few weeks ago, and he asked me if I would read a letter that he got from a constituent regarding a resolution he wants to put before the Senate, and regarding some wording with disabilities.
Just because he knew.
And he said, I know your family and whatever, and so he asked if I would read it and what my thoughts were. And so I just replied back that there had already been a concurrent resolution back in 2007 regarding the same thing, which it was a concurrent resolution, but he wasn't aware of that. And so he said, hey, thanks a lot for letting me know that. And so I'm going to proceed with so. But there you go. It's a relationship.
Yeah, they knew to contact you, right?
Yeah, that they know.
That doesn't happen overnight.
So what you'll get tomorrow, and I'll give you a little bit. We'll go, and Aaron and I can do this too. Okay, let's let you do this. So let's take that same issue that we just did the HCR. I'll go be the chairman up front. Why don't you spec up, and I'll give you give them a little bit of how the testimony came out.
Okay.
All right, so we'll give you a little bit of that, and then we'll let you go. You guys all have been long enough. So let me go sit up there.
Yes, please do. I'll sit here.
Okay, so I'm the chairman of the committee.
I didn't really know that there were 2 paths. I'm not going to watch it. Well, it's
The first thing you'll notice is suddenly it seems to be more intimidating when you're sitting here. And all of a sudden, the first time I spoke, Okay, well, you are much more seasoned than I was. Super intimidated for some reason. Kind of like my voice wavered, and the people who were there still make fun of me.
If I could call the meeting to order. Mr. Costello, I appreciate you coming this morning. You were going to speak to us about?
HJR 5001.
All right, you go right ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members of the committee, my name is Aaron Costello. I am the registered lobbyist for Black Hills Energy. I am also an employee of Black Hills Energy representing their government affairs for South Dakota. Thanks for the opportunity to speak today. I'm speaking in support of HJR 5001. I think that the current system is broken. I think it alienates voters, and that the solution is to pass a statewide primary for all constitutional offices. You probably recall the stories, if you weren't there, of what happened at the last constitutional or the last state convention, where essentially, from the perspective of some, the process was hijacked by a small number of motivated people.
If I get, Mr. Costello, do you really want to use the word hijacked?
No. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will keep my testimony to the bill. The current system disenfranchises the average voter, or your average citizen, every citizen who does not get a chance to vote for who their primary candidate should be. The current system places the power in a small number of people who don't always reach out to their to the constituents in the area that they represent to make sure that those interests are being represented at the convention. The solution to that is to let people, individual voters, vote on each primary election. That is the best way for a voter's voice to be heard, and the best way to make sure that the way our democracy was set up is executed properly here in South Dakota.
Mr. Chairman, I have a question for Mr. Costello.
Yes, go ahead, Senator.
Mr. Costello, I have one question for you. Were you at the convention yourself to witness this?
Mr. Chair?
Go right ahead.
Thank you so much. No, ma'am, I was not.
Thank you.
So I'd follow up on that. So what you're telling us is just the impression that you had of what went on, or did you hear that from someone else?
Well, Mr. Chair, thank you for the question. It's a great question. I trust our reporters in the state, and I trust the news stories. Plus, I have heard from people who were there personally, which seems to tell a pretty straight story of what went on.
I think we've got 30 other people lined up behind you to speak. Do you have anything else that you want to add to that?
I would just reiterate, Mr. Chair, I believe that the current system is broken, and the way to fix it is to let everyone vote in the primaries.
Thanks very much. As easy as it is. So then what would happen is that we would take turns and you'd have additional proponents. Are there any other additional proponents that say would come up? And I would say, please, we've got a lot of people in the room, so try to confine your remarks to new information. We don't need to hear the same commentary that we heard from Mr. Costello, not to denigrate what you're telling us. We just don't need to hear it again. So please just bring us new information if you want to speak to the issue.
And that was a really good question, because that's the kind of questions that lawmakers ask. They're looking to poke holes and be like, okay, you're talking about this, but really, are you an expert, or are you just pontificating because you've got a problem? Yeah, chip on your shoulder.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, and they also, that's why, if you're up on behalf of yourself, that's where you can't go wrong with telling your own story, because they can't dispute it. Yeah, you were a witness, you're living it. Yeah, you were there, it's your child. Yeah, you understand the issues with the school, it was your school system. Yeah, it was the IEP for my kids that got hammered. I mean, so your story is indefensible, or at least for their irrefutable. They can't poke holes in it. So you don't need to belabor it, and they'll carry it to a point. But your story, they won't be able to argue with, because you're right, and they won't be able to. So whenever you get in a position So you want to be brief, you want to be succinct, you want to be organized, you want to know what you want to be your message, and you're not going to be able to tell them 20 things. You're going to want to have 1 or 2 things in your head that you want to communicate. So you want to kind of keep it short. You keep it to those 3 things, and you put it in the context of your own life and your own story, and they can't question you. They can't argue with you because it's your story. Then all they can do is listen. They can't ask the questions about were you there, or do you know what the hell you're talking about, because they will know that you do. And it also puts you in a position of strength when you're talking to them, because your story is your own. And it's absolutely valued and absolutely valid.
And one of the best formulas for advocating for change is present the problem, personalize the problem, present the solution, and then personalize that solution. And that's what I've tried to drive home. And like, the problem is this, the solution is this. Anything else to say? Yeah, the problem is this, the solution is this.
Andy's an engineer.
And that's a good point. If you have cred or life experience, that for these people who may be seeing you for the first time are going to then reinforce that you're a subject matter expert. Yeah, something like if this was something else like engineering related. But Aaron Costello, graduate of the South Dakota School of Mines, bachelor's and master's in mechanical engineering, currently employed by Black Hills Energy as their government affairs manager, and boom, establishing cred, right, for people who don't know me, hypothetically.
Kept you guys long enough.
Thank you. Aaron, thank you very
I
much.
appreciate this opportunity. This is really unique for me. Thank you.
First session I watched was 1977. And I've watched every one since then. If I went over there and testified today, I would have been just as nervous as I was in 1977. I didn't know what I was doing and stumbling around. I still stumble around quite a bit. But yet the thing is, they want to hear what you have to say. Because when you sit down and say, I am who I am, here's my background, you got them. You don't know that, but you got them. You got their attention. And you got a very brief time to be persuasive. And you will not get that attention when you're dealing with a whole milieu of people, trying to get their attention in the crowd, or when you get them in front of a Senate committee, or give them one-to-one like you had the opportunity to. That's precious. And again, they're available. Good advice I heard today, again, start your discussions with them early. Because sometimes you're going to have to bring them along. That's going to require time, education, research, and believe me, they've got tools that they can use. Because every legislator is a member of the LRC, the Legislative Research Council. And they have staff assignments. And they have committee assignments, and they have specialty areas. So you will then, through the legislator, maybe find out that LRC person who's knowledgeable about the disability issue, maybe knowledgeable about how the federal law intermeshes with the state Medicaid policy, how maybe Social Security works in a particular unique way, how it fits in with South Dakota's WIC program and all sorts of things like that. So anyway, great deal of expertise there. So to kind of segue into what I've been asked to do this afternoon for a little bit, is just talk a little bit about the LRC and then go through how they have their particular website set up. And I know a lot of you, if not all of you, have already taken a peek at this, you have a sense of it, and there's just a couple things I want to highlight, just by way of, if not reference, if not new information, just to kind of refresh and talk about some of the things you may find of more interest than others. First of all, the LRC itself. You know, when South Dakota first began as a territory, back in the aughts and 1870s, the capital moved around, was to Yankton for a while, then went to Bismarck, and then it came back and split up, and the state was in Huron for a while, and then all sorts of things happened, and it ended up in Pierre. And it was what they called a biennial, meaning that it only met every other year. There's very few legislatures in the country that do that now. North Dakota is still a biennial. They only meet once every 2 years. South Dakota had a very smallish staff or a presence from session to session, very small. Open the mail, stored the stuff, very few actions were taken. Budgetary things were done, they had to pay the bills, taxes were collected, accounts were done, audits were done, things like that, but very little was done with regards to policies and legislation itself. And then as the biennial got busier and busier and busier, the discussion began whether they should go to an annual. And in the 40s and 50s, that was kind of the thing in the United States, is to go to an annual meeting of the legislature. But in the meantime, they had this cadre of people, the staff, that kind of kept the lights on and kept some of the ongoing functions functioning. And then in 1930s, states started formalizing what that's going to be. And it really began in the state of Kansas. And then it just blossomed from there, that they would have full-time staff that would be assigned to the legislature, and that would tend to run things that needed to be run from session to session to session. South Dakota began it in, unofficially began it in the late 40s, and officially it became statute in 1951. And it's very interesting. I got the particular statute here, and I thought the language was kind of interesting. I can pull it out here. I tell you, when it's cold, my fingers just do not work. It says, the State Legislative Research Council shall continue. So it leads you to believe it's been around, it was doing things, but they said shall continue. They kind of post facto blessed the event. And that was 1951. Now, they set up a statutory framework, and you can find it very readily at the U.S. in the South Dakota State Code at 291-2911, 2-9-11, lays it all out. But by statute, the LRC is made up of every member of the legislature. So when you see the staff, it's LRC, but technically the whole legislature is the LRC. And they have an executive board that runs the activities, that gives it the structure and gives it the provenance, if you will, to direct things to be done. And it's made up of membership of both houses and both political parties. 8 from the House, 7 from the Senate. And it's 15-member board that runs day-to-day activities. And then they will assign subjects, because the LRC is charged by statute to deal with policies, deal with long-term plans, and then they also work with directing the interim committees. And there's a set number of interim committees that will receive work to do between the sessions. And those are assigned. Sometimes it follows just typical things in appropriations, budget circumstances, other activities that come up. Some may be special that arise in the legislature because of debates. A couple of years ago was prisons, a lot of time on prisons. A couple of years ago also they had taxes. Governor Dugard, when he hit the wall on the tax issue, he had a summer interim start studying that. Last summer, it had to do with the program in the Human Services Department, the family, I forget, what's the name of it, Arlene? Family Services, Family Support 360, thank you. Family Support 360 got a good hard look at, and that's a program that's designed to allow families some additional assistance so they can have persons with handicaps stay out of institutions and have more full life in the community. So that is one of the functions of LRC, is to run the interims. Another thing that they do, they are the repository of all the state legislation and the documents and the policies. And it's a huge job to just manage all of that. And they run it. And they also set up the legislative committees, and they run the legislatures. You saw the committee today. That's technically scheduled, set up, and run by the LRC. And LRC is an acronym that they use, and it's the Legislative Research Council. Now, in addition to the bills, you get some idea of, I'm looking in a particular section here in my notes. In addition to bills, you have resolutions, and I always Xerox this because I can't keep track of them all. You have the whole resolution thing, and there's 3 different resolutions that you're going to see. And the one they talked about yesterday was Steve Wheeler and Mr. Costello from Rapid City. They're talking about a joint resolution. And here's how the resolutions run. You have a House resolution or a Senate resolution. That pertains to the affairs only in that particular House. And it requires action only by the legislative chamber that's concerned with it. And that is used to express an opinion. Yesterday you heard one in the Senate supporting Israel. That was a Senate resolution. Only needed one House, and they dealt with it. That will just then go on. It expresses an opinion, makes a request of the other House to express thanks is another reason for having them, and then to regulate a procedure that the House or Senate runs. So that's a House or Senate resolution. Concurrent resolution. That expresses opinions and principles of the legislature not having the force of law. It is used to authorize sessions or committees to instruct the Department of State Government to do something, to petition federal agencies, and to request interim studies by the Legislative Research Council. And it was at one of those concurrent resolutions that both houses have to get involved with, both have to pass, that got that Family 360 interim study done last summer. So that's a concurrent resolution. Then you have what they call a joint resolution. And a joint resolution contains matters of legislation only. It is used to refer a matter for referendum to the people. That means when something goes on the ballot. Several years ago, they had a resolution on Medicare. No, Medicaid, that was done by a referendum. That wasn't done by a joint resolution. What was it, a couple of years ago? It had an accountability. There was an accountability resolution several years ago, and they passed it, the people passed it, then went back to the legislature, and they changed it to the Governmental Accountability Board. And so it had a real weird history. But that was a joint resolution. And that's also to place a constitutional amendment on the ballot. And I think there's one out there being developed to allow abortions to be put in as a constitutional ballot item. So you'll see that will come out. Ratify proposed amendments to the U.S. Constitution. The last one we had an opportunity was had to deal with equal protection for women. Equal Rights Act for women. South Dakota did not join on that one. So when they say, I gotta correct myself, know that the abortion thing is gonna be done by public referendum. It's not going to be done by joint resolution. They thought about it, they didn't think it was going to get through, so anyway, it's going to go out a different way. Now, there's three parts of a bill. And the reason I want to tell you that, I'm going to talk about something come up a little bit later. You got the sponsors, if you remember the bill this one, you have the sponsors, and you have the title. And the title is for an act entitled such and such. And then you have the enacting clause, which says be enacted for the legislature. Then you have the body of the bill. So you have those four elements. Keep that in mind, we'll get back to it. Now, I'm going to kind of touch around here for just a bit. This is a lousy way to try to entertain and inform, but I do apologize for it. I just don't know how else to do it.
Good question. Do we have that information? Like, you went over the definition.
I will get it to you.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I apologize. It's all gonna be a handout. You'll get it. No,
Okay.
yeah, and for this, don't take notes. Let's just watch the screen here. But no, thank you. Very fair question. I apologize. I should have announced that I'll give this to Mary Kay, and you'll get it. You'll get it in the next handout. Okay, here's, you get at this particular screen many different ways. You go inside SD.gov and click around for it. MyLRC is another way to go get at it. I just use this right there, and it's South Dakota Legislature, and it pops up this way. And there's other ways to get in here, but generally you get to this screen eventually, and this becomes the template. Now, you see right away it pops up. You got bills. And that just goes through and lists all the bills. And you'll find down here at the bottom, this is where after you're done with the bills themselves, then you start to have HB, you know, it's down here. You have the House. Then you have concurrent resolutions coming on down. So that's how that's all located. And so that's just the bills. Here you have the codified laws. Now, I cannot tell you how much you save and what a great resource you've got. You've got all the state statutes right at your fingertips. And also you have the state constitution at your fingertips. You've got the federal laws at your fingertips. You've got the federal code of regulations at your fingertips. Thousands and thousands of dollars, literally, of resources are at your fingertips at no cost. You know, when we started advocacy out this way around South Dakota, just to have a copy of the laws cost something like $1,500, $2,000 a year just to maintain. It's a lot more expensive now. And this will give you just an idea of how this rich resource you have. So there you have all the laws. Right there, and just go on through. I love my computer, but that thing would echo. You hear a lot of cursing. Anyway, then you have the chambers committees, self-explanatory. You have all the committees listed here. You have the House and the Senate are all broken out. So if you want to know who's on the committees, you can do all of that. Here we've got the bills, the legislators are right here. All the contact information is right there. So you're going to be able to find all of that information, and it just it just keeps going. Then you got historical listing. You want to see if any of your relatives were legislators. You can use this. So they got a list of all the legislators that's up to date, and you might find that of some interest. And you can do that, and then you can just brag about your next Christmas note that you found out something. And then go back to here. Interim committees. I mentioned that these are committees that meet. There's the standing committees on the left. You got the appropriations, bonding, Code Commission, Executive Board, those are the groups that meet, rules review. And there's nothing posted yet because there's been no interim committees done any assignments yet. And then you have the calendar. And this gives you the day of the session. And you notice in LD1, that's a legislative day 1, legislative day 2, 3, and it goes on that way. And you'll notice the breakouts. We're now into a rhythm of 4-day work weeks for the legislature. And it goes all the way down to March. It's going to be March 7th is the last day. It's the 37th day, and they reserve one day about 2 weeks later. And that's to consider the gubernatorial vetoes. And that'll be that day there. Now that again is just the overview. Now here's the meat of this site, and this is where it really gets fascinating. You're going to see a lot of duplication, so keep that in mind too. Here you have the legislator contacts. Again, some of them have pictures, maybe they don't. I'm not sure. My system's not bringing it in right now. But anyway, again, you can find again another way of getting the addresses. If you want to find your legislator, you can just do it that way. You can do it by a map and just click on the district. There you go. District 29. It gives you Kamak, Kirk, and Wink. Chiefy rather than Wink. So that's how you can find it if you want to go that route. The 24 legislative listing, again, duplicative, but it just comes out a different way. And then address lists and archives, it just goes back and gives you some more information on that. The session, again, I'm going to go back this way. The bills. Again, all the bills. But here's where you want to start paying a little more of attention, because what you can do is tailor this to, you can tailor it a little bit. You want to look up a thicker bill, say you want to do something with taxes. Let's click on it first. Now let's see if this works. Now it's not in the filter. Usually, I'll do a Google search. The Google search isn't as pristine. It's not as good, and you don't get quite the variety, but there just pops up a couple bills. But if you're refining your look, there's a way you can do it. Here's another easy way of looking at it. As bills come in, they start to develop these subject index lists. And if the bill is going to deal with something that's brand new, they just keep adding to the list. So the list will come on with about 15 or 20, and now it just keeps going up. Education. For example, there's all the bills today in education. It's the bills, and you also have a couple resolutions in there. Here's one honoring educator. So you have that. So this is going to, again, be developing, and it gets more robust, if you will, gets more refined as you go. Here's, again, where you really want to start paying attention. The bill reports. You get a status report, and this is an amazing event here. This click here gives you every bill that's filed. Once it's filed and assigned to a house, it goes into this list. And this keeps daily track of every piece of legislation. So if you want to know literally up to the minute or to the hour what happened to a bill, the stuff you just heard, that Senate bill you just heard, that'll be on here probably about 3 o'clock this afternoon, 4 o'clock tonight for sure. because the staff will start going home, they wrap all this stuff. My wife is the secretary to a couple committees, and they gotta get all that stuff done before they leave, and they're out of there Friday, probably around 4 o'clock, so they'll all be all logged in by that time. Again, a tremendous resource. Used to be a day, I cannot tell you how much time we used to spend following this stuff. This used to all be on paper, and you'd have to, sheet of paper, that just had volumes and tons of paper. And just to get a bill was just ludicrous. Steve shared yesterday that you had this thing called a spindle behind the House and the Senate, and they had 2 copies of the bills. They put them on the spindle. Well, you kind of waited, and then you went down to the what they call the post office. And organizations like ours, we had post office boxes, and they had the bills piled up in there. And there were days where the contractor would go out to bid, and the printer in Rapid City would do the bills. Well, we drove from Rapid City yesterday. Not the easiest driving, was it? But times those bills didn't come for 2 days, and it just was just terrible, really hard to do stuff. And so there you go. It's all right there. Now here's bills signed by the governor. Nothing's on her desk yet, because no bill's been through both houses, and so she has nothing yet. Bills vetoed by the governor, so no action yet there. And the bills on the governor's desk, that means these bills have been through both houses and are just awaiting the action. The governor's got so many days to sign a bill. Sometimes they'll sit there until the very last day, but she will either have to sign them or or veto them. You can't just put them in your pocket. Again, in here you have the subject index. Probably because if you're curious, you don't want to be flicking around all over. And so there's another one. And then you have another deal in the bill reports down here.
Maybe a silly question. If the governor vetoes them, is it done like before the session is over so they can kind of?
Has to be done. Has to be done before the last, it'll be done before the last date, and then they'll roll it over, and then vetoes are subject to review, and then they're heard, and the veto is either concurred with or it's overridden on the last legislative day, which would be at the end of March.
So it is overridden by the House.
Both.
Both sides and the law still passes.
Right. If it's overridden, it passes. Here's the beauty, you can customize the bill report. You can get on here and click the bills you want to keep track of and embed them in there, and then this thing will automatically pick it up from there. So you'd be able just to see where your bills are, what the reports are, what's current, what happened to them, et cetera, et cetera. Fiscal note report. Remember Mr. Willard talking about a fiscal note? If you want to create a lot of havoc for a bill, have your legislator put a fiscal note on it. Because a fiscal note means it's got to go through appropriations. This morning, the opponents to the electric bicycle bill mentioned the fact about traction ripping up the trail, causing more money, more things like this. Well, if a legislator wanted to be real mean about it, he'd say, I wonder how much that's going to be to repair Mickelson Trail for all those electric bikes. So he can make a motion to put a fiscal note or request a fiscal note and send it to the appropriations. That stalls things, makes the inefficient part, talk to the engineers. They got to figure out how much a couple of scoops of dirt's going to be, how much it's going to cost to haul it out there. But yet it's very effective. And there's 3 fiscal notes already called for. And one, obviously, the expiration and reduction of certain gross taxes. There's a battle about, are we keeping and not keeping that little bit of tax they gave us legally on. And that's already under fire, so the fiscal note will be on that. So that is very, very important. Now, here's one you've got to look at regularly, the Hog House report. What's that? Fascinating history about the Hog House report. This particular event created law in the United States. During the 30s, there was a bill came in sponsored by supporters of South Dakota State, then the state university. Then it was a state college. Now it's the State University at Brookings. They wanted to expand the livestock barn that they had dedicated to hogs, expand that out so they could do more research. It was voted no, can't do it, and they tabled the bill. Legislators got together, and enough of them got together. What they did, remember I mentioned you got the sponsors of the bill, and then you have the title of the bill, then you have the enacting clause, and then you have the body of the bill. What they did is went in and stripped the body of the bill out of this hog house bill. And they put another entire body of a bill in there. And it had to do with nothing to do with hogs. It had to do with another tax issue. So anyway, the bill continued that way. And the legislature said, just
The
a
hog house
second.
title, is that right?
The hog house related the title.
Okay,
Everything after the enacting clause.
but everything else was different.
Everything else was different. So it's still read. An act to build a hog house. But it had nothing to do with the hog house. Legislators said, you can't do that. They took it to the U.S. Supreme Court. U.S. Supreme Court said, according to the way the statutes were written, according to the way they managed bills at that time, you can do it that way. And to this day, we have this feature in South Dakota. It's extremely unique. We have this feature, so when they say, have you checked the hog house report, this is what they meant. Towards the end of the session, when it gets time where it's past time of running or for submitting bills, the bills will have deadlines, and they're coming up shortly. You only have about 2.5 weeks to get all your bills in. For individual bills, then you have shorter time for committee bills. And if you don't get the bill in, something comes up, you can try to hog house the bill. Strip everything after the enacting clause, put it in, and see if you can get it through. And I'll never forget the day I had a call from my counterpart in New Mexico. And I know him because he used to work in Nebraska. And he called me up and he said, Kean, he says, what the hell's a hog house bill? And I said, well, here's what it is. He said, well, they're going to try to do that here in New Mexico. And they're using the example that South Dakota had. And he wants the background on it. And it started in South Dakota. But you have to keep track of this and know where it is. And because every once in a while, it'll surprise you what comes up in there. Now, you have some things that have been asked for, some information been asked for, and it's reported on regularly, and this is one of them. Prison jail cost estimates. It's not filed yet this year, but that is something that you'll see in there. That comes up. Withdrawn reports. This is very interesting too. This is where you have a legislator or a committee. That's the committee or State Department. They file a bill and they say, well, now's not the time to withdraw it. This keeps track of the withdrawn bills. I happen to know a little history about this one here. This bill is going to be in state affairs, House State Affairs, I believe. And there was some discussion before the bill being heard, and the chairman, Mortensen, heard some people talking about it, and he just overheard it. He said, well, you're not ready to talk about the bill, are you? And they said, well, no. He said, it's on today, you know, right? Well, we're not really, and Mortensen's one, if the bill's listed, you're going to hear it, unless there's extraordinary circumstances. And he was not convinced that they were ready, and he said, maybe you better withdraw it because the parties had to do with the solar energy industry trying to set up a part of a statewide stewardship program. They're discussing costs, formation of it, who's going to run it, who's going to monitor it. They just didn't have it ready to go, and they thought they could just amend the bill and work it out. And Mortensen said, no, pull it and we'll do it a different way. And so they pulled the bill. So this is how you keep track of that, what's been withdrawn. You don't get the insights, of course, like you just heard, but that is something else. And it's important to keep an eye on that one too. A lot of bills will have emergency clauses. In South Dakota, unless you have an emergency clause in the bill, bills become final, they get effectuated the next July 1st. So you have months between the bills passing and the bill becoming law, unless there's an emergency. Generally, it has to do with finances, taxation, providing services, or trying to go back and fix something. Then you'll see emergency clauses, and they will say, we want it to be effectuated, and they'll move the date up. And they'll put it just bang right after the veto date, which would be the end of March. Or sometimes, frankly, I've seen it, one year they had to go back and take care of a major problem, and they just backfilled it right up during session. They said it was going to be in a couple weeks, got it through the House's governor, signed it, and they effectuated it immediately. It was a pretty severe issue. So anyway, those are some things you want to keep track of during the session. And the interim committees, there's the committees, but there's been no assignments yet. And so these will fill in as they go along. And the next one's the law. You get state constitution here. Again, you get all the codified laws. You get the session laws. Again, it's the laws as they're being developed. It's repetitive, I know. But then they'll have, it's easy for you. If you're working on laws, you don't want to go clicking around. You can just go up and down and take care of that. And you got laws that are archaic too. Administrative rules. Mr. Willard yesterday mentioned that South Dakota passed a statute. That's the global thing. Then you have what they call administrative rules. Administrative rules assigned to the departments are what effectuates the law. They're the ones that dot the I's and crosses the T's. They're the ones that put in, the graphics, and they're the ones that kind of fill in and flesh out what the law says, how it's going to be implemented. And that has a system all its own. And frankly, it parallels creating legislation. You have an administrative rules process, and they have put it out through what's called the register. And here's the current register. And the departments have to petition the department. And here's Game, Fish, and Parks. What they're going to do, they serve on the Interim Rules Committee, they serve the petitions to receive, that they receive, that are going to affect these laws. And they want a notice sent out, and the notice is going to impact those pieces of legislation. And here they are. And these are the scheduled public hearing, and these are the rules that are going to be reviewed. They'll lay it out in there. And so this is a completely separate process from legislation. And you can attend those as a member of the public. Those are open to the public. And you can go in and you can testify. More than once, we got a statute was passed. Our agency did not like the statute. We went into rules and we fought it. We fought the interpretation. I'll give you a very good example. Believe it or not, at one time, South Dakota did not buy computers for persons with disabilities. They did not buy computers for persons with disabilities to communicate. They would only buy the real boxy, and I'm talking ancient history. Remember Dragon Speak? It was an old format that was just very, very antiquated. That was the only device that they would buy persons with communication challenges. They would not buy a computer that could speak, because you can play games with computers, you can watch things with computers, you can communicate with computers. I mean, how stupid was that? So anyway, they passed this law that they can just do drag and speak and a computer with limited ability and a computer with only certain features. And then they put that in rules, and that's where we fought it. And we fought in rules and just tried to point out how silly it was. They were inhibiting people. They were trying to stop them from communicating better, doing things that ordinary people do with computers. And we got the thing changed. So keep in mind, if you see a statute, oftentimes you got to follow the rulemaking and make sure what happened or what you think is going to happen in the statute really is what's going to happen in the rules. And then you have the register of it, then you have an administrative rules manual. And you get a drafting manual that shows you how to do the rules. And that's worth its weight too, because if you're going to amend something, you can do that and show them how to do it. And then you get the committees down here, and then here's the rules of the state of South Dakota. And you get all the rules here. Again, thousands of dollars worth of paper. Right here, you can go figure out, work with it, and it's just fantastic how good this is. It's just, yes ma'am.
So with Nicole's example of the Medicaid, so would that be the rule?
It could be, and that's what I'm going to talk to her about pursuing.
Okay.
At one time, there was a rift because things were only for persons with developmental disabilities. And you had a discussion, there are people with other health impairments, with intellectual challenges, that at the time, and technically now perhaps aren't falling within the rubric of developmentally disabled. And you got into this battle. So my question was, did they say, okay, we'll cover both, intellectual and this? But it meant to include, not to exclude. And so you see again how important words are. And that's what I want to talk about, Nicole, later, and take a look at that. But I think Whitman picked up on that today too. When I talked to her, I said, you had an issue with that, and I think she understood what the issue is. And she could get a pretty quick answer from them. But I'll touch base with you. But no, you're right. That's very, very important to understand this process, and that's what it is. Now, the other one is budget. Again, this is one of the most torturous things you're ever going to want to look at, but it's available if you ever have the interest. You can go in and you can find out and get all the hearing documents from all the departments. By hearing documents, this is the information they're providing for the legislature. When they go in and say, here's our budget, here's what we want to do, and here it is. And you can find all that stuff, and here's human services, they were up last week. And these, I just pulled one out. These are reports. Now, none are right there, but these are reports. There's thousands of pages like this in this section, but they'll go in there and give you everything that's required, everything the Legislative Appropriations Committee has requested, everything that they're anticipating is going to be asked, and it's all in there in various ways. And what you've got to keep in mind is also they have monthly reports that are required. And for example, the general fund recaps. Want to know what the state made? Here's the receipts of the general funds for the state of South Dakota in November of 23. It tells you all the income, all the expenditures by categories. And so you can, now here's one I'm really perplexed about. Alcohol beverage tax, they're showing a deficiency of 99% of what they targeted. And I'm not sure what that means. I don't know if they're still doing the books on that, or if that's a final figure, but that's going to warrant some discussion. Yeah, buying for Christmas parties, and they
I
just,
guarantee there's a lot of
Just
other
buy
sales
them.
from November and to harvest and Thanksgiving.
yeah, so anyway, but again, hunters coming through, but again, that gives you some, and here's the budget resources. Government operations. Okay, here's what they call the blue book. It may take a while, this thing chokes the system. This goes on, again, thousands of pages. It gives you ungodly amount of detail. So when people say, you're going to hear in testimony, excuse me, I forgot to put something at the table. When you hear people talking about, well, check the blue book, what's it say? The blue book is the budget. They have last year's budget out. They don't have this year's. This is what they mean by the blue book. Somebody has gone in and this is bound in a huge blue book. And they've gone in and they pull all that data together and they make it available to the legislature. And like I said, you can see the cursor over here on the right. It's barely moving. We're going down page after page. So this thing goes down just thousands of pages. I say thousands. It's got to be a good several hundred pages, 300-400 pages. Imagine lugging that thing around every day. That's why they sit in that committee room and get gaunt, pale faces after a while. Then you have, but that's the term blue book. Another term you hear is the red book. Here's the red book. And this is what they call the red book. And this is the book that runs the House and Senate procedures. When you can make motions, when you can't, how many votes to do this, when you do that, how to get something off the table, all that Hog House 6E-7 is in there, stuff like that. That's the red book. You know, I don't know if they publish these anymore. It's on here. It's in the system. But
I think I saw some of the senators.
they may have, but you know, they're real chintzy about these things. Very cool.
Because while the whole thing was going on, a couple of, like, 3 of them were walking around the room, and the one guy was carrying that, and he was showing the other end. And
Yeah, here's how we're gonna do that. Here's how we're gonna do it. Yeah, it's a Bible. They get shredded pretty easily, back and forth. But anyway, that's another book you want to hear about. You hear about the blue book, you hear about the red book. And those are the 2 books. Rest of this, you just have some ongoing reports. And then you have also down here, you have, this is the LRC staff, but you have people develop expertise. So Carter Dykstra is the expert in education. So again, working with the legislator, and you have an education question, tell the legislator, you understand that Dykstra is a guy in LRC that knows about this stuff. Do you mind asking him, or do you mind if I ask him? It would be better if he asks. But have Dykstra then ask a question for you and something in education. It's techniques like this, strategies like this, is how you just develop information, how you get into the people that know what's going on. And over the course of years, you develop, I developed very personal relationships with a lot of the people in LRC. Several of them were classmates in my law school. And so and that's how you get information. So Dykstra's on board, he understands this stuff. He may see something, and he may go to the legislature and say, well, this legislator wants this, and this one wants this. You may want to get together on something, or this is coming up, you may want to be aware of it. Now,
So
keep
these
in
people
mind.
are not legislators, or just,
Pardon?
they're not legislators, they're just people who
These are staff to the legislature. And these people are housed over in the state capitol building. But they develop expertise by body of law or area. And so it's good to know this crowd too. Now, keep in mind, in South Dakota, we do not have a partisan legislative research council. That's very important to know. They work across the board. Several years ago, within the last, about 10 years ago, we had a very, very active group of legislators that wanted to bifurcate the LRC. They wanted to have the Democratic staff and the Republican staff, like many states do. Wisconsin, Minnesota, not Nebraska, it's unicameral. But you have many other states, Colorado's one too. They have the go-to people, but it's party affiliated almost. They decided in South Dakota you wouldn't have that. In fact, it got so hostile, the LRC director, a good friend of mine, one day met with the board, and the board said, well, we're kind of leaning this way, and he said, here's my resignation. He quit on the spot just for the conversation going on, because he did not want, and rightly so, we're a small state, it's even smaller when you have a minority party, and you just lose a lot by having that bickering even at that level. So they're nonpartisan. So don't expect a LRC guy to favor one party or the other, one legislator or the other, and they're very good at that too. I give them a lot of credit for doing a very fine line, just walking right the narrow. But it's good for them for doing so.
I have another question.
Yes, ma'am.
Is there somebody that is in charge of like civil rights?
Not as such.
So I noticed I was going to email Senator Thune about disability discrimination, and so I was looking for like civil rights, and it wasn't even like a option, and now I'm seeing that, and I'm like,
in South Dakota, they don't have it broke out that way. Generally, when a rights issue comes up in certain areas, like education, for example, they'll send you to the education department to deal with a right in education. Now, I'm not saying that's going to be a good experience. Chuckle. I mean, it may be a futile gesture, but that may be how it goes. Voting, they'll send you to the Secretary of State's office, things like that. They don't have an office that someone gives that kind of time and attention it really deserves. Not like the federal level where they have the office of, and every department has the office of.
yeah. Okay.
So anyway, another handbook, the budget handbook. This just gives you the program analysis and how they do it and who the people are that run that. Again, it's a pretty select group that run that. Anyway, let's.
So a lot of this stuff on here is like 2024, but can you go back and look at previous years? Or
The archives are selective. I'm not sure really how much of that is archived. I tend to go back in statute, well, that's of course historic. I have gone back in a few years in some of the bills to kind of see a track of something, but I'm not sure how far back that goes. However, if you do have an interest, contact the LRC. They themselves are the repository of all of this. And they may have a better way or an easier way to tell you how to get it, or if you're specific enough with them, they'd be able to dig that out for you and do that. Now,
I just had to use that. Just last week, I was looking for the bill from 2007 that was related to the use of the word disabling, and using people first language instead. So there was a House concurrent resolution that was done in 2007. So you can find them under session and archived, and it goes all the way back to 1997.
So it's 97, okay.
That's what it looks like to me.
Yeah. Well, so the legislators go back to day one when they first met. So several sections of this will be archived. But boy, if they archived all the budgets, I mean, my system would be on fire right now. But anyway, if you have a family member with an interest to be a page or an intern, you have that section 2 on how to go about that. Then resources here if you're going to, this is again, informative information on how you develop a law, how you design a law, what a law is, where does it come from, and then they have a little quiz over here. They have a little knowledge quiz things that are kind of cute. And so you have just some self-education things.
Do they have to be chosen to be a page or do they apply?
It's an application. It's an application process. What they try to do for pages, generally they're high school students, upper level juniors, seniors in high school. They try to disperse it throughout the state so they have representation. A lot of times they try to, because legislators, like they have constituent family members, have pages so they can get more votes at home. And so anyway, that's always, but it's done by application. Intern is a little more rigorous. Generally, those are college students or people in graduate school that come and they serve a little higher function and they're actually doing, legislative work and they keep track of tighter bills, things like that. The pages are merely, hey boys or hey girls, get this, do that.
I just kind of wondered, like, how does somebody even know about that? Because, like, is your government teacher in high school supposed to tell you about that?
And they're supposed to, they're supposed
I've never heard of them.
In fact, I sub at Riggs High School regularly and it's in there. They have who wants to be a page and intern.
I wish my school would have told me about the PAGE program. I would have definitely tried to do it during my high school years and try to be involved in that.
And it's good experience, and they should, but you're right, they should. But anyway, the last feature, and then I'll be out of here. This is worth the price of admission right here. This is under the references. Okay, I'm trying to move this in a little further here. It should come up on the other side. You have a drafting manual. This is how you draft legislation. And this morning we did a real quick one at our table to do an amendment. And remember Mortensen did a different way of doing the amendment, right on the page with the other one. And so anyway, this is the manual here if you're going to be drafting. Very, very important. And then other resources, the issue memos. This is when things come across, and this is how you develop things and white papers. For example, this is questions that are posed to the legislature, and they want a memorandum written to clarify and expound on something. And then this was on initiatives and referendums. And this then explains what the issue was, and then they go in, the LRC looks at the issue and circumstances and things like that. And then that is that particular thing. You had on the nuclear power, an overview, some of the historic things, very, very interesting. How they figured out continuing appropriations, because they had a real issue a couple of years ago on how they're going to do it and whether they had a hidden trap in the budget model. And so it's very important to keep track of that. Then you got, here's the reference book. This is another version of the Red Book. And I think this is why the Red Book, you don't see it quite so much. This is on everybody's laptop that the legislators carry around. And it's basically the same series of information. You have maps, the district maps. If you want to go in and take a look at the map, you have performance report. Every once in a while, the legislature will say, oh, we need a report on that topic. You give reports that are required. The Board of Regents by the departments. Every department's required to put in an annual report, and it's there, not terribly enlightening in a great number of respects, but you get that. Going on down, you get program evaluations, required reports, and the investment council came up a couple of years ago, well, actually this year, it's reporting, the question came up about sustainability to the state retirement plan, and they need reassurance periodic that the investment model is correct. And so they put them on a required report format that they now report annually to assure the powers to be that the state is not going broke or the trust fund's not going broke. Then there's a lot of statistics that are drawn up. Everybody wants to know about the legislative session, how many bills, and that's all in here if you have curiosity about bills submitted. Total number of bills, how they were passed, what didn't pass, how they're disposed of. And I'm sure you'll jump in there and look for how many hog house bills. Statistical comparisons. Again, sometimes there's something else in here that I thought was going to pop up at this point. Women legislators, then they go into the legislators themselves, and there's a lot of information, historical nature about the legislators and representation. Also, here's the other point under external resources. This is the agencies the LRC belongs to, the legislature belongs to. And here also is something that is just priceless. The U.S. Code of Federal Regulations. And I'm glad to use the Cornell Law format. Cornell Law School format is a very good format. The pitch of the font size is nice, easy to read. The way it lays out clean. And again, you get the entire federal code. I can't tell you how expensive that is to maintain. And it's updated regularly thanks to Cornell Law. And well, it's not thanks, they pay a fee for that. But anyway, it's great. And not only is Cornell Law on that, but the code, with the regulations, they got the U.S. Code too. And again, that's another just absolute huge volume. I do work did a lot of work in, you hear me tomorrow, or not tomorrow, but in March, I do a segment on, Social Security and what they call a POM, Program Operations Manual System. And that literally, it's 3 ring binders, and they're 6 to 8 inches thick. And currently there's something like 47 volumes available, hardcover. And it used to be a day we'd have to march over to the federal courthouse and go into the Social Security office and look through them by hand. Nightmare, just an absolute nightmare. Notice clear over to the right, it says MyLRC. I cannot tell you how easy this is going to be for you to keep track of every piece of legislation you want. What you do, you click on that, and you go in there and create an account. It's here's the account, kind of like a dummy account here. And this is the account. And what it does, it creates all of this information for you. And what it will do, let me just go back. I had 2 bills I wanted for purposes of this demonstration to keep track of. And it was these 2 bills here. The ACT test for public schools, and then the observation of time in South Dakota. And what you can do, you can go in there, and any bill you want, you can click it, drag it, and drop it in a screen, and this thing will keep track of it for you. And it will keep track. And it, you got a filter here, you can make it a little more active than I have. But what you can do with that, then this is how it comes up here, but this will come out in a different format. But if you hit this in the screen, this will tell you when that thing's going to be heard. All right, to a calendar. It just pops it out there. So if you're curious when something's going to be heard, you can time this to your phone, your watch, and there's other alerts within there that you can get it however you want to get it. So that's just one thing it does. And in documents, there's just a bunch of stuff I'm keeping track of from a variety of resources. And it's just something I keep track of. And then notes, if you want to put notes to a bill, and you can do it that way too. And then if you want to key it back to a rule, and then in here I do this to my other account, I have some rules I watch, and you can just plug it to notify you when the rules hearings are going to be. Incredible service this is. And it's so easy to do it, it just constantly churns away, and it updates it automatically for you, and you'll be up to date. The bills we just did, session committees, if you want to add a committee in there, you want to keep particular track of when they meet, who's on it, all that's there. And then interim committees, and you can archive stuff too. And if you go through a whole list of notifications. Notify me when the bill hearings, notify me when fiscal notes are available. Just goes right on down. When the rules are up, when committees meet, interims, regular committees, fiscal documents, even when the state's going to put out a press release. You got all of that right at your fingertips.
Robert, you exited out again.
Yeah. I would like that.
You done? Okay.
I don't.
Another thing too, so what I do with my LRC is I created a shortcut on my phone, because if I'm on my computer, I'm doing work. I'm not like doing this if I'm at work. So otherwise when I'm home, I'm never on my computer because I don't want to be. I have my phone though. So I created a shortcut to my LRC just on my homepage, because I don't think they have an actual app, but it works really slick. It's mobile friendly. So then I can just easily sign in without having to constantly go to the website and whatnot. So it's really easy to just create a shortcut on your phone.
Right.
So if you need help with that, I can help you. If you have an Android, then I can help you.
You got an expert right here. Yes, I cannot help, but she can. And she's staying through Sunday. So you can help everybody.
Sunday? I mean, I'm fine with that. That's Sundays without my children.
Anyway, any questions? Yes.
Where would I go on the site if I wanted to see or maybe hear past,
Okay, thank you. That's something I completely blew. Wyatt, thank you very much.
Or I forgot, but it's the thing we just did at the church.
Okay, the testimony.
Yeah, testimonies.
Okay. You can go on there, there's several ways you can do it. You can go through the committees, and you'll find little flags in there, and you'll find points where you can click, and it'll take you right to the committee hearing. And the day of the committee, the hearing will be set up. You go into the committee itself, click on committee, and it'll come on the screen, and you'll see an icon there, and you just click it, and it'll come up right on that. If you want to, and then in the archive, the same thing. If you want to archive it, or if it's archived, you go in there, just hit the icon, and the archive will pop up. For example, I went to listen to, because I really got confused on that, the bill about time zones. So it's really confusing to me. So I went in there, listened to the testimony, and it was simple. I found the bill, and then I found when the date the bill was heard, and then I clicked on the icon, and it had right on there that it was at the 3rd minute, 37th second is when I went to slid it over to 3:37, and bam, that started the testimony on that particular bill. So it's all there. Wyatt, thank you very much for bringing it up.
It was really easy to get to. It takes like 3 clicks from my shortcut to get to the, I have my bill saved and I go find my bill that I saved and then it takes me right to the information on it and then you can click on recording.
It's easier than anything else that we did today. The easiest thing to do is go in and find how to get on the media for the bill. And it's all there, it's all at your fingertip, not on mine, as you can see, but it's all there. Tremendous resources. And then the reason I kind of, probably ad nauseam go on about that, was that at one time it was real tough. It was real tough to carry around bundles of paper. And now you see the legislators carry around a laptop, their iPads, and, but the thing is, and the point I'm trying to make is, you've got all of that in your fingertip. You are as smart, you are as diligent, and you are as knowledgeable about any of those people over there. More so in the areas you have an interest in. Believe me. More so in the areas that are heartfelt to you, that you have your experiences, your life's challenges with, you're the experts in that. This information will help you expound on that, help you create a larger forum to receive that information. So with that, I want to thank you for taking up more of your time. I'll see you in the morning. Have a good rest of the day. Thank you.